Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. The runes representing the heart of the gods on Wood's chest flared into brilliant silver light. Without holding anything back, his vast life energy was directly converted into an immense power that coursed through every muscle and vein in his body. While this power granted Wood incredible strength, it also visibly affected his appearance. His previously radiant golden hair turned to silver as his life force drained away at an alarming rate. The surging power caused his muscles to swell, and as they strained under the immense pressure, fresh blood oozed from his skin. Even his bones groaned under the strain. The strength granted by Heart of the Gods was based on a percentage of his base power. In other words, the stronger his base level, the greater the enhancement. The percentage increase depended on the amount of life he burned, and now Wood was burning his life without any reservations. Are you insane? If you keep this up, even if you do seal the Witch of Envy, you'll die. Echidna didn't know what the runes on Wood's chest represented, but as the wisest of the witches, she could tell that he was trading his life force for power. The greater the power, the higher the cost. The stronger someone was, the more clearly they understood this truth. Echidna, with all her knowledge, never believed that someone could gain unmatched power for free. Given the mana fluctuations from Wood, the price must have been enormous. Dying is inevitable. Do you have any other better plan right now? Remember what I said. If you get the chance, take Amelia and Subaru and leave. Otherwise, if we truly start fighting, I fear you might get caught in the crossfire. As Wood's words ended, his figure vanished from Echidna's sight. He was moving at a normal high speed, but at this moment, his speed was so great that Echidna felt an illusion. That Wood was moving even faster than instant teleportation. Indeed, the shadow teleportation technique, despite being fast, had a casting delay. Now, however, Wood's speed was enough to tear through the atmosphere without any such delay. 100 Ghosts swordsmanship, extreme ice dual blades. Snow Maiden. Blood gushed from Wood's body, not because of injuries, but because the power surging within him was too great. If he didn't release it soon, his body would explode from being unable to contain the rapidly growing power. The sky, previously covered by the dense, dark purple mana of the Witch of Envy, now suddenly filled with thick clouds. As the temperature plummeted, snowflakes began to fall. First, it was just a light flurry, but soon it became a heavy snowfall, then escalated into a blizzard. 2 massive blades of ice formed an X shape in the sky, growing larger as they flew, until they tore a huge gap in the Witch of Envy's vast mana shield. At the center of it all, the Witch of Envy stood shrouded in a dark aura, her gown as black as the night itself. Her face remained hidden under a shadow, concealing her appearance. Seeing Wood charging towards her, the Witch of Envy curled her lips slightly, raising a deathly pale hand. An army of shadows surged towards him, as though she intended to absorb and devour him just like she had with Echidna earlier. According to Echidna, the Witch of Envy's devouring ability was unstoppable, capable of consuming anything. Even magic. Faced with her attack, Wood didn't try to block it. Instead, he used his incredible speed to dodge. The dark shadows moved quickly. Against other great witches, who were more like spellcasters, they would have been more than sufficient. But catching Wood in his current state was another matter entirely. The shadows surrounded Wood from all directions, and as they tried to latch onto him, hoping to drag him into the witch's body, they merely passed through an afterimage of Wood. 100 Ghosts swordsmanship, dual blades. Bull Demon. The figure that the shadows pierced was only Wood's afterimage. He reappeared behind the Witch of Envy, the runes on his chest trailing a glowing path through the air. The 2 ice blades in his hands had now turned black under the power of armament hockey, shining with a metallic luster. A spectral bull covered in blood energy appeared behind Wood. The 2 black blades in his hands were like the horns of the bloody bull, driving upwards toward the Witch of Envy's abdomen. Rather than being devoured by you, I'd rather do things my own way. Like right now. Taking the initiative. Wood's words were paired with his assault on the Witch of Envy, and he immediately moved to press the attack. The Witch of Envy couldn't understand Wood's foreign language insults, but judging by his playful expression, It was clear he wasn't saying anything good. Instead of allowing his blades to pierce her, she responded in kind. The armament hockey-covered blades struck her back, but instead of penetrating, they were halted by an invisible force. Sparks flew as through the blades had hit a solid wall, but they could not advance an inch further. Enraged by the attack, the witch turned and swung her arm, releasing a jet-black crescent of pure mana aimed straight for Wood's face. Wood pulled back just in time. The black crescent passed by, slicing the earth in two for several kilometers without making a sound. Everything it touched was consumed by the witch's envious power. Just as she had consumed half the world 4 centuries ago. Though Wood had created some distance between himself and the Witch of Envy, his 2 ice blades still remained stuck against her invisible barrier. The blades, formed from his mana, shattered into countless fragments as Wood clenched his fists. The icy remnants spread out in all directions, but as they neared the Witch of Envy, it was as though they were blocked by an unseen wall, flowing around her instead. TCH, just like that Archbishop of Sloth. Another one with an invisible ability. But no defense is without limits. Now that our mana levels are about equal, I refuse to believe I can't shatter your turtle shell. The ensuing battle could only be described as a high-intensity spectacle. Wood utilized his speed advantage, moving rapidly within the Witch of Envy's domain. Slashes, close combat strikes, spells. He used everything he had, attacking her relentlessly. Elements exploded across the battlefield, shattering the space itself, leaving cracks like broken glass. Wood pushed Heart of the Gods to its absolute limit. He had never planned to survive this fight, so his reckless attacks began to trouble even the Witch of Envy. Finally, after a barrage of relentless attacks, Wood managed to break through her invisible barrier with a slash. The ice blade was now inches from her face. Whether out of a twisted sense of humor or curiosity, the Witch of Envy's face shifted, revealing Amelia's features beneath her shroud. This is exactly what I was waiting for. I've never actually fulfilled my duties as her knight, but now you've given me the perfect opportunity. Predictably, seeing Amelia's face made Wood pause, stopping his ice blade just short of her. But before the Witch of Envy could look pleased, she realized that the ice blade had started to transform into a chain of frost, binding her body. Breaking free of such a simple spell wouldn't have been difficult for the Witch of Envy. But Wood didn't expect the chains to hold her for long. Just a moment was all he needed. Seeing the dark shadows beginning to erode the frosty chains, Wood did something that left even the Witch of Envy stunned. He didn't swing his blade, nor did he launch a spell. Instead, he stepped forward and embraced her. The soft sensation of her chest against him made it clear to Wood that Amelia and the Witch of Envy did look quite similar, but there were differences. Amelia had a well-proportioned figure for someone her age, but compared to the Witch of Envy, she was clearly lacking a bit. However, Wood wasn't hugging the Witch of Envy to take advantage of her. He had a very different purpose. Using Echidna's method to rescue Amelia. The oath he took at the Dragonstone during the royal selection wasn't just for show. The connection between the Dragon Priestess and her knight might not be as deep as a spirit contract, but it still held power. As Wood embraced the Witch of Envy, he used their connection to awaken the sleeping Amelia while simultaneously channeling his immense mana into the witch's body. The foreign mana inside the witch's body disrupted her magic. This was exactly what Echidna had instructed him to do. With the witch's magic being affected, she couldn't prevent Amelia from waking up. Once Amelia was conscious, with her help, Wood would be able to drive the Witch of Envy out of Amelia's body for good. Chapter 385, The Witch of Envy Sealed in Ice. At this moment in the sky, a strange scene was unfolding. A man and a woman, both with resplendent silver hair, were tightly locked in an embrace midair. However, upon closer inspection, it was evident they weren't sharing a tender moment but were instead locked in a fierce struggle, a real battle of life and death. This could be clearly seen from the bursts of magical energy erupting from them. Wood's intentions were quickly understood by the Witch of Envy. Although Amelia had lost her role as the key after the seal was broken, she was still important as the vessel. If the vessel were to be lost, Satela's power would weaken to some extent, so she wasn't going to let Wood have his way so easily. A massive amount of life force was converted into magical energy through the Heart of the Gods. And Wood used this immense power to combat the Witch of Envy. Though Amelia had awakened as planned, forcing Satela out of her body proved challenging. In theory, enough magic power could indeed drive the Witch of Envy out, but there was one crucial detail. The nature of Satela's power itself. It was the power of devouring. A force that had devoured 6 of the great witches and half the world. It could be described as an insatiable beast, swallowing all in its path. At first, Wood's magical energy seemed able to compete with Satela's power. But as the battle continued, the Witch of Envy gradually began devouring his power, and the situation began to turn in her favor. The supposedly wisest witch, yet she came up with this stupid idea. Did Echidna even consider this outcome when she suggested it? Even with the power of the Heart of the Gods? Wood was paying a hefty price. His own life force. He knew he couldn't keep up this deadlock indefinitely. Even if he could, Satella would gain an advantage as she continued to devour his magic. Just as Wood felt that persisting this way might not only fail to save Amelia but also cost him his own life, something unexpected happened. Wood could sense that the devouring force within Satella was disappearing, and it seemed as though the power itself was retreating. Initially, he assumed it was a trick by the Witch of Envy, but then he realized the being in his arms had begun to speak. Despite having the same face, the voice and tone were completely different from before. Amelia's knight, I am Satella, not the Witch of Envy. While I can still control this body, please drive me out of this child's body as soon as possible. Hearing these words, Wood finally understood what was happening. The Witch of Envy had two personalities. The cruel, destructive Witch of Envy and the gentle Satella. Previously, the Envy personality had been in control, but when Wood had been clashing with her, it gave the Satella personality an opportunity to take over. With Satella's cooperation, Wood finally managed to force the Witch of Envy out of Amelia's body. As dark purple magic energy surged out of her, Amelia's gaze gradually regained clarity. Seeing Wood, who was covered in silver hair, Amelia looked ashamed. She tried to say something, but before she could, Wood violently threw her away. Echidna and Puck, who had been waiting outside, immediately flew forward to catch Amelia as she was thrown from the magical vortex. Puck, we have to help Wood. He can't defeat the Witch of Envy on his own. Amelia, who had just been caught by Puck, wanted to rush back in to help Wood. However, before she could take action, she felt a stinging pain across her cheek as someone slapped her. A slap that left her face red and swollen. It was none other than the Witch of Greed, Echidna, and her usually calm expression was now filled with anger. He put in so much effort to save you, and now you want to throw yourself back into danger? In a battle of this level, you're just a small fry. Even I can't interfere. If you go back, you won't be helping. You'll just be a burden. If anyone else had slapped Amelia, Puck, who regarded her as his daughter, or Subaru, who viewed her as a goddess, would have already attacked. But since it was Echidna, neither dared to speak up. Puck owed his very existence to her, and Subaru was intimidated by the sheer force of her presence. Maybe we could try my power. I can't tell you about it, but if I die or you kill me, it might work. Subaru's power of return by death was unexplainable, but that was the only option he could think of. Despite having the ability, Subaru hated dying. Immortality didn't mean he enjoyed dying over and over again. After hearing about Wood's sacrifice, Subaru felt that dying a few times was a small price to pay to save his friend. However, before Subaru could take action, Echidna stopped him, her expression mocking. Your so-called power is just return by death. But do you even know who granted you that power? No, it's not some god as you might have thought. It was the Witch of Envy herself, Satella. Do you really think you could use the power she gave you against her? Subaru was left speechless. Echidna was the first person who had ever managed to articulate his ability. Not even Wood could do that. This revelation made Subaru realize she might be right. His return by death power had come from the Witch of Envy herself. Using someone's own gift to fight them. It was obviously futile. No matter what, we have to save Wood. He's my knight, and he saved me so many times already. I can't just stand by and watch him take it all upon himself. I can't. Amelia remembered everything. The possession of her body, her childhood, and the tragic outburst of magic. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was just a burden, a calamity for those around her, unworthy of being saved. Slap. Another sharp sound echoed in the air. Echidna had slapped Amelia again. He is your knight? Well, he is also my contract partner. Compared to that, a knight and a witch are nothing. I never liked you, but since this is his wish, I suppose there's no choice. After saying this, Echidna delivered a karate chop that rendered Amelia unconscious. She tossed her over to Subaru and Puck and began preparing her teleportation spell. With powerful magical energy swirling everywhere, it wasn't easy to find a stable spatial node to open a gate. Are we really just going to abandon Wood? It feels like the complete opposite of what I should be doing. Subaru protested, looking at the vortex of magical energy. According to the usual protagonist script, Subaru thought he, as the chosen one, should be stepping up to save the day. This is Wood's resolve. If you want to stay and die with him, I won't stop you. After all, he's Amelia's knight, not yours. This time, saving you was just a bonus. After some struggle, Echidna managed to open a portal amidst the swirling magic and urge Puck and Subaru to move quickly. To Puck, Amelia was everything. Though he felt guilty, he didn't hesitate long. He wanted her to live. Subaru, realizing there was nothing more he could do, reluctantly stepped through the portal. Echidna was the last to enter, and before stepping through, she took one last, lingering look at the swirling mass of magic above. I hope what you said was true. That your death is not true death. If I just completed a contract and then my partner died, they might mock me as an ill-omened witch. Not long after Echidna and the others departed, the Witch of Envy's more violent personality regained control in the vortex. Infuriated by Satella's choice to release Amelia and Bywood for embracing her, the Witch of Envy decided to consume him before swallowing the Satella personality herself. If you like devouring so much, then let me give you everything. Let's see if you can truly devour it all. Pseudo-divine ice magic. Absolute freeze. Previously, when Wood fought against Dragon God Orsted in the Mushoku Tensei world, he had managed to reach the pseudo-sword god level through the power of the Heart of the Gods. Now, Wood once again pushed himself beyond his limits using the heart, elevating his ice magic to a pseudo-divine level. An overwhelming chill spread throughout the area, and the rune representing the Heart of the Gods on Wood's chest shone with an intense silver light. A layer of frost began to form on his skin, spreading outwards. Sensing the danger from the cold, the Witch of Envy grew anxious. She tried to escape but found herself tightly held by Wood. When it came to raw physical strength, the Witch of Envy was no match for him. As she attempted to use her devouring power on the frost covering her, she discovered, to her horror, that it was immune to her powers. Don't bother. This frost is different. Even your authority can't devour it. Absolute freeze is the most powerful ice magic I can use. And the price for using it is my own life. The ice covering you is made of my life and body. Even a sword saint would be powerless before it. Normally, I wouldn't use a magic that comes at such a cost, but after pushing the Heart of the Gods beyond its limit, I was already doomed. So I might as well go all in. If I can't kill you, then I'll just seal you forever in this frozen land. As Wood's words echoed, his body began to turn into ice, freezing the Witch of Envy along with him. She realized how dear the situation was, but she was powerless. Her devouring power was ineffective, and she could do nothing but watch herself slowly get encased in ice. Watching Wood gradually shatter into ice, the Witch of Envy memorized his name. Wood Hookson. The second man she would never forget, after Subaru Natsuki, whom she loved dearly. As dark purple magic was replaced by ice blue, an immense cold wave centered on Wood and the Witch of Envy swept across the land, freezing everything in a radius of nearly 10,000 miles. Under the absolute cold, all life within that range was frozen, forever trapped in that moment. At the very center of the frozen landscape, a massive lotus of ice bloomed. Within the transparent ice was the silhouette of a woman. The infamous Witch of Envy, Satella. One could see her figure clearly through the ice, but her face remained obscured, as if covered by an impenetrable shadow. The news of the Witch of Envy's resurrection had spread for barely half a day, and many kingdoms hadn't even had time to react before they received word that she had already been sealed again. Chapter 386, The Darkened Sister returns after all. The Witch of Calamity, who once devoured half the world, was a fearsome entity whose name was known not only throughout the kingdom of Lanika but across the entire world, haunting like a nightmare. Compared to the three great heroes who sealed the Witch of Envy over 400 years ago, the fact that only one person, named Wood Husson, was responsible for the seal left everyone stunned. The reason for the surprise was simple: the name Wood Husson was practically unheard of in this world. Wood had only recently begun to make a name for himself. Prior to that, Wood Husson kept such a low profile that his fame was nowhere near comparable to that of Sword Saint Reinhard. At first, many people believed that the resurrection of the Witch of Envy and the rise of the new hero, Wood Husson, were merely rumors spread by troublemakers. However, when they ventured to the former Elven Forest and saw the boundless ice plains and the enormous ice lotus blooming there, they fell silent. The magic was so formidable that they couldn't imagine anyone being capable of such a feat. And the figure standing within the frozen lotus, though sealed in ice, emanated an aura so chilling it sent shivers down their spines, proving it wasn't some mere imitation. Of course, not everyone could witness the Witch of Envy firsthand. The vast ice plain was formed from Wood's own life force and magic. Ordinary people couldn't even make it a few miles in before succumbing to the cold. Even those with considerable strength could barely manage 100 miles into the center. Only true experts and those proficient in fire magic could reach the frozen lotus. Can this ice really hold the Witch of Envy forever? Reinhard stared at the colossal frozen lotus, still in disbelief that his greatest rival, Wood, had chosen to end his life in such a manner. The ice is formed from Wood's life and body. You can think of it as Wood himself. The magic-infused ice can remain for tens of thousands of years, and even forbidden spells may not leave a scratch on it. Explained the Witch of Greed, Echidna, who had since been redeemed. She gently touched one of the lotus leaves as she spoke. To use one's life and body to freeze everything. Damn it, that guy even managed to look cool in his death. Subaru Natsuki punched the ice in frustration, his grief evident. Though death claimed them both, Wood's demise was far more heroic, grand, and beautiful. Following the sealing of the Witch of Envy, Wood Husson's name spread throughout the continent, earning him the title of the Frozen Knight. The new hero after the three great heroes. The ice and lotus that represented Wood even became the emblem of many knight orders across kingdoms, signifying the pinnacle of knightly honor. The royal selection ceremony of the kingdom of Lunica ended, and the victor among the 5 dragon maidens was not Crus, who was the favored candidate, but Amelia, who was initially deemed unworthy. The reason was simple: with the Witch of Envy resurrected, and Amelia herself appearing, it proved that Amelia and the Witch of Envy were distinct individuals. Though both were silver-haired half-elves with similar appearances, they were undeniably different. Moreover, Amelia's ultimate victory was largely because Wood sacrificed his life to seal the resurrected Witch of Envy. The Witch of Envy posed too great a threat to the world. Wood's self-sacrifice to seal her perfectly embodied the virtues of a knight. Because Wood had been Amelia's knight, the people felt that granting Amelia victory was the only way to do justice to his memory. Besides Amelia, the second biggest beneficiary among the dragon maidens was Anastasia Husson. Although she wasn't the sworn protector of Frozen Knight Wood, everyone knew that Anastasia was Wood's elder sister. Due to this connection, Anastasia, initially a mere merchant, was elevated to the highest ranks of nobility, and the Husson name spread throughout the continent. Now, the name Husson was not only the stuff of heroic tales but an honored legacy. Yet Anastasia refused to accept any rewards from the kingdom of Lunica and directly opposed Amelia, who had now become queen of the kingdom. She left with the Iron Fang and returned to Karagi. Anastasia believed that Wood's death was solely because he had become Amelia's knight. Silver-haired half-elves were a disaster in her eyes. Her brother had been by her side for over a decade without any issues. But as soon as he became Amelia's guardian knight, a tragedy like this happened. How could she accept that? With the help of the Bowel Hunter Elsa, the Husson Trading Company absorbed the underground assassination organizations and rapidly expanded, becoming the world's largest trading company. Anastasia wasn't planning on stopping there. She aimed to use her economic power to bring down the kingdom of Lunica as vengeance for her brother. While constantly troubling Amelia and the kingdom, she also sought a way to bring her brother back. This determination came from Echidna, the Witch of Greed, who told her that strictly speaking, Wood wasn't truly dead but existed in the form of those frozen plains. Echidna had said this merely to console Anastasia, but Anastasia took it literally, believing that her brother could still be saved. If magic existed that could turn a person into ice, surely there was magic to reverse it. If she could find it, her brother could return. Since she was the sister of a world-saving hero, many kingdoms turned a blind eye to Anastasia's aggressive expansion. Amelia was among them. But when it became apparent that Anastasia intended to melt the ice imprisoning the Witch of Envy and bring her brother back, the kingdoms and other races became restless. With so many interests at stake, the powers that be concluded that a hero was only a hero when they were dead. If Wood were to come back to life, it would pose a great threat to their power and influence. Moreover, if they melted the ice that was Wood, how would they deal with the freed Witch of Envy? The current world lacked the 3 great heroes from 400 years ago, and there was no other frozen knight like Wood. Unable to tolerate Anastasia's whims, various countries began to suppress her trading company. However, the Husson Trading Company was now a force to be reckoned with. The original Iron Fang mercenary group, assassins from underground organizations led by the Bowel Hunter and the Beast User, and even the Anna twins Ram and Rem, who also wished to save Wood, now stood united. Amelia found herself torn. She too wished to save Wood but feared that unsealing the Witch of Envy could plunge the world into chaos. Hence, while various nations and Anastasia faced off, people like Amelia and Echidna remained neutral. They neither opposed melting the ice to save Wood nor supported Anastasia's aggressive stance. They sought a more balanced solution. Amelia and Echidna were far from ordinary. Given their extended lifespans, they had plenty of time to wait for a resolution. In short, even though the Witch of Envy had been sealed, the world did not find peace but plunged into further turmoil. If one were to look closely, they'd find a platinum-haired girl cloaked only in a sheet, operating behind the scenes, fueling the chaos. Among those who felt the most bitter about the outcome were the Witch of Envy and, naturally, Pandora. She never anticipated that, after years of meticulous planning and seeing her goals nearly within reach, her efforts would be thwarted by Wood Husson. Pandora tried everything she could, but even her power to warp reality could not shatter the frozen lotus. Since she could do nothing, she chose to lurk in the shadows, helping Anastasia behind the scenes. The world was vast, and Pandora refused to believe there was no way to melt the ice. After waiting a millennium, she now had all the patience in the world to continue waiting. Compared to the chaos in the Re-Zero world, Wood had just concluded another life simulation due to his depletion of life force. Ding! The character you simulated has died. The world life simulation has ended. You have acquired the following unique abilities from Wood Husson. Blessing of Knight's Honor, modified, when fighting with the intent to protect someone, all attributes, willpower, and recovery rate are greatly enhanced. Blessing of the Bright Moon, when fighting under the moonlight, your speed, strength, and skill power increase. Witch's Contract active ability, Contract with a Witch of Sin allows you to summon the Witch of Greed, Echidna, in certain conditions and worlds. Passive ability, due to the contract with a witch, your mental strength is enhanced, your affinity with magic increases, and your magic power is strengthened. The world life simulation has ended. In addition to the default simulated character rewards, the host can select one of the following. Blessing of the Sword Saint, derived from Sword Saint Reinhard's core blessing, grants the power to slay the unslayable and fully unlocks the sword's potential. Blessing of the Archmage, derived from Margrave Roswell's blessing, enhances affinity with all elemental attributes, maximizing magic power. Unseen Hand, derived from the Sin Archbishop of Sloth, enables the conjuring of numerous invisible arms to strike foes. Wood's unique ability, the Knight's Honor blessing, had undergone a slight change after his appearance in the Re-Zero world. Previously, this blessing only worked when he was a knight. But clearly, not every world had such a role. Therefore, the system made some adjustments. As for the three abilities that appeared, they were neither disappointing nor particularly surprising. There were no dreams of the Phoenix blessing, Return by Death, or incredible abilities like Lion's Heart from the Witch of Greed or Pandora's reality warping powers, but the three abilities offered were certainly strong. Blessing of the Sword Saint was self-explanatory. World unique, the blessing that the Sword Saint family relied on for survival. Even an ordinary swordsman could instantly become one of the world's strongest with such a blessing. If the blessing of the Sword Saint was the ultimate blessing for a swordsman, then the blessing of the Archmage was the pinnacle for magic users. Its effect could similarly turn an average mage into a powerful grand sorcerer. Among the three choices, Wood was torn between selecting the blessing of the Sword Saint or the blessing of the Archmage. The Unseen Hand was immediately dismissed. Though it seemed impressive, being both offensive and defensive, it would be quite useless in the world of One Piece. The ability to be unseen was pointless since countless people in the New World had awakened their observation haki. Sneak attacks on the strong were impossible, and using it against the weak was unnecessary. Hence, it was quite underwhelming. To be honest, if the ability could also make Wood invisible, he would consider it. At the very least, it could be useful for voyeurism. No, even if it allowed shared tactile sensations, Wood would have considered it, but unfortunately, this power had no such features aside from being invisible. After much hesitation, Wood finally chose the blessing of the Sword Saint. Wood's reasoning was simple. Compared to magical prowess, swordsmanship remained one of the primary forms of combat in the One Piece world. Additionally, the blessing of the Sword Saint had a unique feature that the blessing of the Archmage lacked. Its ability to cut what cannot be cut. In other words, even natural-type devil fruit users, as well as some that were nearly immortal, such as certain Paramsha and mythical zones, would find no advantage over Wood. Chapter 387, The Lost Lily in the Devil's Lair. Wood pushed open the door to the captain's quarters, taking a much-needed deep breath of fresh air. He made his way over to Robin and Ruth, making sure they could see him, and inquired about any recent updates from the sea. Robin knew very well that the movements of the Straw Hat Pirates were Wood's top priority. So, as soon as he stepped out, she handed him the gathered news. Big Mom and Kaido, two of the four emperors, were at each other's throats after the recent Tea Party incident. Pirates across the sea were on edge, watching these two formidable forces clash. Of course, many pirate crews saw this as an opportunity. They chose sides, hoping to take down one of the four emperors and elevate their own status. One of them was none other than Gecko Moria, the captain of the Thriller bark and a member of the Seven Warlords of the Sea. Everyone knew that Gecko Moria held a deep grudge against Kaido of the Beasts. Moria had once been a promising rookie on the seas, leading his crew to challenge Kaido head-on. Unfortunately, Kaido's overwhelming strength completely destroyed Moria's crew, leaving Moria as the sole survivor. Devastated, Moria transformed from a powerful pirate into a lazy, overweight shadow of his former self. His once grand ambitions were utterly shattered by Kaido. After losing his entire crew, Moria became convinced that living only brings loss. He then partnered with the brilliant Surgeon Hogback to create his zombie army. When Moria heard news of the impending clash between Big Mom and Kaido's pirate crews, he thought his chance had finally come. Moria knew his zombie army alone couldn't handle the Beast's pirates, but with Big Mom's crew in the mix, the odds started to look different. His zombie army wasn't enough to take on the Beast's pirates head-on, but it could certainly beat down an opponent once they were vulnerable. The grudge from 23 years ago in Wano country still burned within Moria. He vowed to finally settle it with Kaido. Just as Moria gathered his forces and prepared to set sail under the cover of darkness, an unexpected group entered the Devil's Triangle and boldly stepped onto Thriller Bark. At first, Moria didn't think much of it, assuming they were just small-time troublemakers. He was about to send his subordinate, Absalom, to deal with them when he realized it was none other than the rising Straw Hat Pirates. Seeing Monkey D. Luffy's human fruit model, Sun God Nika devil fruit ability and remembering the corpse of the giant oars lying in the freezer, Moria suddenly had an idea. Since he was about to go up against Kaido, why not aim even higher and take over Kaido's position among the four emperors? Gekko Moria had apparently forgotten that he was no longer the pirate supernova he was 23 years ago. He had since become an overweight slob. Now, as one of the 7 warlords of the sea, Gekko Moria was indeed a noteworthy figure on the seas. Among the forces that could match the 7 warlords, only the Navy admirals and the 4 emperors were of equal standing. The 7 warlords were already considered top-level pirates, and the next step up was the 4 emperors. Gekko Moria had been a warlord for many years, and Kaido had held his position as one of the 4 emperors for just as long. Now, Gekko Moria thought it was time they swapped seats. If it were in the past, Gekko Moria wouldn't have been so arrogant. But when he saw the Straw Hats stepping into Thriller Bark, his confidence grew. Using the power of his shadow fruit, he would take Luffy's shadow and implant it into Oars, creating the ultimate zombie. With Oars on his side, Gekko Moria thought he could dream about claiming Kaido's position. Maybe even play the 2 crews against each other and benefit as a bystander. Thus, Gekko Moria delayed his confrontation with Kaido and set his sights on the Straw Hat Pirates now wandering through Thriller Bark. However, the story unfolded almost identically to the original version. Except Robin wasn't there this time. The Straw Hat Pirates steamrolled through Thriller Bark. The perverted Absalom, capable of turning invisible, was caught peeping on Nami while she bathed and was promptly kicked into oblivion by an enraged Sanji. The genius surgeon Hogback, whose ideals were incompatible with those of the Straw Hat mascot Chopper, ended up as nothing more than a mosaic smeared on the wall. Perona, the final officer, managed to defeat 3 of the Straw Hat's strongest fighters, making them collapse in despair. Only to be completely defeated by the trickster god Usopp, who was immune to her abilities. While Perona was preparing to escape with a stash of loot, she had the misfortune of running into Bartholomew Kuma, another warlord of the sea, who was supposedly there to keep an eye on the Straw Hats, but was really just playing the role of a babysitter. Perona was swatted away with a single paw-shaped strike. Thriller Bark's ultimate boss, Gekko Moria, did successfully obtain Luffy's shadow and resurrected Oars. However, he greatly overestimated his own strength after years of inactivity and underestimated the protagonist's plot armor. In the end, Luffy almost broke Gekko Moria's bulging neck. After defeating Gekko Moria, the Straw Hats were pretty much spent, but the tyrant Bartholomew Kuma, who claimed to be sent by the world government, merely made a token appearance when he could have wiped them out completely. Seeing Luffy's grinning mugshot on the newspaper, alongside the 300 million belly bounty, Wood knew that Gekko Moria, with his bulging thyroid, was done for. Of course, the newspapers didn't explicitly report Gekko Moria's defeat. After all, the 7 warlords of the sea were officially recognized by the world government and represented their power and authority on the seas. 2 of the warlords being simultaneously defeated by a rookie pirate was hardly a respectable piece of news. Naturally, they covered it up as much as they could. How do you guys know so much about what happened on Thriller Bark? Did we already plant agents even in the Devil's Triangle? The newspapers hadn't reported anything about a Straw Hat's victory over Gekko Moria. Wood knew the story because he was a transmigrant with knowledge of the future, but what puzzled him was how Robin and the others knew so much. It's simple. We have someone from Thriller Bark on the island right now. All the information about the Straw Hat Pirates came from her. Trailing behind a fishman, Perona was feeling very uneasy. She was about to meet an incredibly dangerous man. He was known as one of the ancient weapons. A figure feared throughout the seas, commanding influence across the underworld, and even recently, Perona heard he had fought Big Mom and Kaido and managed to leave unscathed. Heaven help her, Perona had no intention of messing with such a terrifying figure, nor did she want to meet him at all. She would rather stay in her room hugging Klamashi and be a shut-in. But, alas, she had no choice in her current predicament. A few days ago, Perona was slapped away by Bartholomew Kuma. She thought she was done for. Unexpectedly, she ended up being carried across the sea by that giant paw bubble, finally landing on this island. Initially, Perona was ecstatic to realize she had not only survived but escaped Thriller Bark. But her joy quickly faded when a patrolling fishman found her. Fishmen weren't uncommon on the seas, but an island populated with many fishmen and even mermaids could only mean one thing besides Fishman Island. The other option wasn't good news. At first, Perona still hoped it was all a coincidence, and she used her abilities to turn several of the fishmen into loafing slackers on the beach. But then Robin showed up, and Perona recognized the infamous Devil Child at once, completely dispelling any hope she had. Nico Robin, the Devil Child. Anyone with a bit of knowledge on the sea knew she was the number 2 of Wood's Weapons Company. And with so many fishmen around, it wasn't hard to guess where she had ended up. The Island of Darkness, also known as Dark Abyss. The world's largest weapons factory and home to the underworld's most powerful organization. Although Perona had never met Wood, she had heard plenty about him from her captain, Gecko Moria. According to Gecko Moria, the marine trader Wood was the most ambitious person he had ever met. Though Wood wasn't an emperor, his network, power, and strength were enough to rival one. Finding herself suddenly on one of the most dangerous islands in the world, Perona naturally panicked. She wanted to escape, but all around her was the endless sea. Even if she weren't a devil fruit user and thus a complete non-swimmer, there was no way she could outswim the fishmen and mermaids on the island. Trying to save herself, Perona had a quick idea and, upon seeing Robin, immediately declared herself as an envoy from the 7 warlords, here to talk business. She thought that while Wood was indeed powerful, the 7 warlords were also formidable figures. Surely, he wouldn't dismiss her offhand. Too bad for her, she had run into Nico Robin. Due to her childhood, Robin had survived on countless lies. Perona's little fib wasn't anywhere near convincing enough for someone as experienced as Robin. After Robin exposed her, Perona, with nothing left to lose, used her negative hollow attack, putting every fishman present into a state of amnesia. When asked about that day, every fishman would shake their heads so vigorously they looked like bobbleheads, insisting they heard nothing, saw nothing, and knew nothing. After all, seeing Robin's black history was even worse than seeing the boss Wood's. It was well known that Wood had little dignity to speak of in many situations, but Robin, as the poster girl of the weapons company, was always very particular about her image. Everyone on the island knew that Robin could be very black-hearted and vengeful. If you got on her bad side, you'd be in for a world of trouble. The fishmen present understood this well, but poor Perona did not, which led to her being on the receiving end of Robin's hospitality for days. If it weren't for the fact that Perona was one of Gecko Moria's officers and Wood had yet to step out, it was uncertain whether she would ever get to meet him. Seeing the man before her, who seemed to be in his 30s with a determined yet gentle face that belied any impression of severity, Perona found it hard to believe that he was the infamous Wood. The underworld boss known as one of the ancient weapons. So, you're the ghost princess Perona? Gecko Moria must have fallen by now, hasn't he? How about you join me instead? Wood looked at the pink-haired girl, who, though 23, still looked like a teenage lily, and casually extended the offer. The hollow fruit's power was impressive. Up until now, it seemed that only Usopp could counter it. No one else had managed to resist her abilities. After all, even Zoro, known for his pride, had submitted multiple times before Perona's power, turning into a slacker. Perona had been one of Wood's favorite female characters back when he watched the anime. With the island still lacking sufficient fighting strength, he certainly didn't mind having another beautiful girl around. Wood knew that Perona's current delinquent-like appearance was entirely due to Thriller Bark's dark atmosphere. But once she moved to Mihawk's place for 2 years, with better food and nutrition, she would quickly transform from a delinquent into a chic urban lady. Not only would her looks drastically improve, but her modest figure would also grow to an impressive 36D. Why would a 23-year-old still have room for growth? Maybe Mihawk had some special massage technique? In any case, Wood thought, if Mihawk, another great swordsman, could raise a loli, then why couldn't he? Hearing how easily Wood seemed to trust her and accept her into his crew, Perona was left dumbfounded. The major factions on the sea weren't something just anyone could join. To even become a mere subordinate in a 4 emperors' crew, one needed a bounty of at least tens of millions of baileys. Even though Perona had been an officer under a warlord, she had never been given a bounty, having spent all her time confined to Thriller Bark. Yet here she was, seemingly accepted into one of the top factions on the sea. Captain, isn't this a bit too hasty? She used to be an officer under Gecko Moria. Can we really trust her to join us? Chapter 388, It's great to have a wealthy senior. The current state of Wood's Weapons Company wasn't looking too good. Thanks to the Tea Party incident, they had managed to offend both Big Mom and Kaido. At a time like this, Robin didn't object to Wood recruiting more power to their side. They certainly needed it. What Robin couldn't stand, however, was how easily Wood seemed to trust Perona. And the way he looked at Perona? It made Robin incredibly jealous. I've been with you for almost 20 years, growing from a cute lily into a mature lady, and you haven't shown the slightest interest. Robin thought, fuming. Now, this expired lily shows up, and you can't take your eyes off her? How could Robin tolerate that? As a transmigrant, Wood knew that Perona was a decent person at heart. And as for why he kept staring at her? He was trying to think about how her negative hollow might interact with the new power he'd just obtained, the blessing of the Sword Saint. Everyone knew Perona was a ghost human, thanks to her consumption of the hollow fruit. She could leave her body as a floating spirit, immune to any physical attack. In that state, she was more invincible than even a Logia-type user. Not even armament hockey could touch her. Since ghosts had no physical form, no one could attack them, including the ghosts Perona produced. In a way, as long as Perona kept her real body well hidden, she could face anyone and remain undefeated. Her ability, the negative hollow, was particularly effective against strong-willed fighters. The blessing of the Sword Saint gave Wood the power to cut down things that couldn't otherwise be cut. Could it work against the intangible negative hollow? Wood was genuinely curious. Perona, you have an ability called negative hollow, don't you? Try using it on me. Wood said. Everyone present froze at Wood's words. Even Perona felt waves of unease. She started to think she had been far too naive. This man wasn't just any weapons dealer, he was the emperor of the underworld, the world's largest arms dealer. Of course, he wanted to get her guard down, and then, after making her embarrass herself by using her power on him, he'd lash out in anger and finish her off. What? Does your ability need some kind of condition to activate? Wood asked when he saw Perona hesitating. As far as he remembered, Perona's negative hollow could be used freely. Yeah, didn't you hear the captain? Go on, use your power on him. Robin chimed in. Robin knew that Wood was deliberately trying to experience the effects of Perona's negative hollow. She eagerly pushed Perona to comply. If only to see Wood turn into a sobbing, pathetic mess, lamenting his very existence. She wanted to share in the experience of someone else turning into a slacker, after all. Are you sure? You want me to use my ability on you, and you promise you won't kill me afterward? Perona stammered nervously. She didn't really have the option to refuse, though. If I wanted to kill you, I could do it any time. Wood replied calmly. Honestly, even if Gecko Moria hadn't fallen, I wouldn't think much of him. The fact that he's lost his status as a warlord makes no difference to me. I just want you to use your ability so I can verify something about my new powers. After that, whether you want to stay here or leave the Dark Abyss Island is entirely up to you. I'm part of the underworld, sure, but I'm still a businessman. Keeping my promises is just the bare minimum of professionalism. Trying to talk about credibility with an arms dealer wasn't something Perona could bring herself to trust. But given her circumstances, she had no choice. Reluctantly, she unleashed her negative hollow on Wood. A ghost with eyes and a mouth, looking like a long, white machi, floated out of Perona and circled around her. Upon seeing it, Robin quietly took a small step back. Robin had developed a bit of a trauma regarding the negative hollow. This devil fruit ability was almost invincible, especially against those who were proud or confident. The stronger your ego, the more devastating the effect. Not wanting to embarrass themselves, both Robin and Ruth kept a safe distance from Wood. They also kept their eyes glued to him, eager to see what kind of absurd phrases Wood would spout in his negativity-driven state. But soon enough, both Ruth and Robin were left disappointed. Perona's seemingly unbeatable negative hollow had an unexpected reaction. At first, the ghost with the eyes and mouth floated right towards Wood, making faces as it approached, preparing to pass through his body and turn him into a listless slacker. But as Wood drew his cursed blade, Tenku, the negative hollow seemed to sense a dangerous presence. It abruptly stopped in front of him, turned around, and darted back behind Perona, using her as cover. Interesting. Wood said with a slight grin. I hadn't expected these things to be more than just a product of your ability. They seem to have some intelligence. Similar to Big Mom's homies. Judging from its reaction, it seems my guess was correct. The blessing of the Sword Saint really can harm intangible beings like this. And if I can harm something as ethereal as a spirit, I doubt Logia and Mythical Zone users would be much of a challenge. Perona was shocked. Since she'd eaten the hollow fruit, she'd never seen one of her negative hollows act scared. Even the long-nosed man who had turned out to be her natural enemy hadn't made her ghosts react that way. He had merely been immune to her ability because he was already negative. But seeing her ghost avoid someone outright was a first. Robin and Ruth were disappointed at not seeing Wood humiliated or getting any juicy blackmail material from him. However, unlike Perona, they weren't exactly surprised. They knew their captain too well. Wood rarely did anything without being reasonably certain of the outcome. Besides, every time Wood went into his so-called seclusion training in the captain's quarters, he came out stronger and armed with some new and bizarre ability. Even Robin, who was closest to Wood, had no idea of his true strength or just how many abilities he possessed. Meanwhile, over at the Sabati Archipelago, as the gateway to the New World and a final stop before Fishman Island, the Sabati Archipelago was where pirates from all four seas would eventually converge. As a result, Sabati was undoubtedly the place in the first half of the Grand Line with the highest concentration of pirates. The entire archipelago was composed of the roots of 79 Yarukiman mangroves, divided into 6 main areas. With the New World as its next stop, and a large number of pirates gathering there, the Navy had stationed their headquarters on the nearby Red Line. Zones 60 to 69 of the archipelago housed both a marine base and the world government's entrance. Because Fishman Island was directly below the archipelago, it wasn't unusual to see fishermen and merfolk on the islands, which also made it a prime hunting ground for slave traders. The booming slave trade was also why the world nobles, the celestial dragons, often visited the archipelago. In other words, Sabati Archipelago was perhaps the world's only island that regularly hosted pirates, marines, civilians, and even celestial dragons all at once. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call it the most bustling island leading into the New World. After defeating the second warlord, Gecko Moria, the Straw Hat Pirates also made landfall at the archipelago. Through Frankie's connections, they planned to find the Dark King Rayleigh to get their ship coded for the journey ahead. Yes, it was Frankie who introduced them to Rayleigh, not Hatchin as in the original timeline. Such was the power of fate. Even though Wood's actions had changed the events in Water 7, Frankie still ended up joining Luffy's crew as their shipwright. After Tom was rescued, Frankie and Iceberg opened a shipbuilding business on the Sabati Archipelago together. But as expected, the two didn't get along very well. Due to differing ideologies, they eventually went their separate ways. With Tom's ordeal behind him and his body now modified, Frankie was confident that no one could recognize him anymore. He returned to Water 7 to start anew and prove he was better than Iceberg. When the Going Merry finally reached Water 7 and broke down, it led to the Straw Hats meeting Frankie. In this timeline, the one who got captured by the Marines wasn't Robin, but Frankie, who was recognized once again. To get a ship built, the Straw Hats saved Frankie from the Marines. Through that ordeal, Frankie came to appreciate the Straw Hats, helped them build a new ship, and eventually joined their crew. Since he and Iceberg had once spent time on Sabati Archipelago, Frankie knew the place well. He guided the crew to Rayleigh for ship coding while also giving them some important safety advice. This place might look small, but don't let that fool you. Sabati Archipelago is no joke, Frankie said, grabbing a cola from the fridge to recharge. Every year, the top pirates from all 4 seas gather here. And if you run into the celestial dragons, those world nobles, don't mess with them. Worried that Luffy and his hot-headed crewmates wouldn't recognize the celestial dragons, Frankie even described their appearance. They'd be wearing ridiculous protective suits and bubble helmets, supposedly to avoid breathing the same air as commoners. Frankie, those colas you just grabbed cost a total of 30 million belly. Are you planning to pay now, or shall I put it on your tab? The owner of the bar, Shaki, who looked 30-something despite possibly being in her 60s, slid over a bill as she spoke. No way, that much for a few bottles of cola? That's daylight robbery, Frankie complained, staring at the bill as he reluctantly opened up his storage compartment to put the spare colas back. Once something leaves my shop, it can't be returned, Shaki said with a sly smile. I'll send the bill to Iceberg for you. You know what kind of business I'm in, so trust me, this is already the discounted price. The moment Shaki mentioned sending the bill to Iceberg, Frankie stopped hesitating. Not only did he decide to keep the colas, but he also considered taking the whole fridge. After all, if annoying Iceberg had to pay, he might as well make it count. Frankie was, of course, familiar with both Shaki and Rayleigh. Back when he and Iceberg first arrived at Sabati, they had received quite a bit of help from them. Rayleigh was the vice captain of the Pirate King Roger's crew, and Roger's ship had been built by Tom, Frankie's mentor. In a way, they were all part of the same extended family. That was also why Frankie knew that the 30 million belly wasn't for the cola but for Shaki's information. The bar primarily operated as an information hub, charging high prices for intel. The Straw Hats were considered family by both Shaki and Rayleigh, so there was no charge for sharing information. But unfortunately for Frankie, he had a wealthy senior. Iceberg had done quite well for himself on Sabati Archipelago. Thanks to his superb shipbuilding skills, he'd received orders from both the Navy and pirates. The coding business on Sabati was Rayleigh's domain, so Iceberg hadn't stepped into that market, knowing it could be a friendly gesture. Otherwise, Rayleigh would have to sell himself multiple times a day just to make ends meet. With ships constantly needing repair before setting off for Fishman Island, Iceberg's shipbuilding company had thrived on Sabati, making him quite a notable figure. He was now wealthy enough to travel with a beautiful secretary by his side, enjoying the high life. 30 million belly? Shaki wasn't worried Iceberg would refuse to pay. Once the payment was secured, Shaki also provided Luffy and his crew with the latest intel about Sabati Archipelago, filling in anything Frankie had left out. First and foremost, there were now 11 rookie pirates, each with a bounty of over 100 million belly, gathered on the island, including Luffy and Zoro. These rookies, hailing from all four seas, had converged here, earning the title of supernovas. The term supernova referred to those who, despite becoming pirates only recently, had already caused major incidents, drawing significant attention from the Navy and racking up massive bounties. At present, 11 such figures had gathered at Sabati Archipelago. Even after defeating 2 warlords, Luffy, ranked by bounty amount, still only came in second. Chapter 389, The Contest of 3 Foolhardy Captains. There's one more thing, Shaki added, glancing at the Straw Hats. Besides the world nobles, the celestial dragons, there are others you shouldn't mess with while on the Sabati Archipelago. You'd best not even think about trying to capture a fishman or a mermaid to sell in the slave market. Frankie nodded in agreement, his expression serious. Doing that would put you at odds with another very dangerous person. Shaki laughed softly. But knowing you lot, you'd never stoop to something like that. That's why Frankie didn't bother to mention it earlier. Nami, who always had an ear out for anything involving money, perked up at the mention of the slave market. While she would never engage in something as despicable as human trafficking, she couldn't help but be curious about the price tag on such transactions. So, fishmen and mermaids, do they fetch a high price? Who would you even anchor if you tried capturing them? Fishman Island? After all, the next destination on their journey to the New World was the home of the fishmen. It would be terrible to offend them before even getting there. Shaki chuckled lightly, shaking her head. Well, fishmen are valuable, sure. But mermaids? Oh, mermaids in the underground market have a sky-high price. Especially young ones. A young mermaid girl can easily go for 1 billion belly. But the problem isn't really Fishman Island. It's the backing behind them. Nami was about to ask more about who could have the kind of power that would scare off the rogue traders at Sabati, but Frankie interjected, his voice turning grave. It's the guy known as an ancient weapon, the biggest player in the underworld, the world's largest arms dealer, the marine defector. Wood. Frankie's expression turned somewhat complicated as he spoke. Wood was an old acquaintance of his. Not only that, he was someone who had saved Frankie's life and the first person to recognize and support Frankie's ideas about weapons. But even as a fellow weapons specialist, Frankie couldn't condone Wood's decision to sell his weapons all over the world. To Frankie, weapons were meant to protect what was important. Meanwhile, Wood had used them to profit from chaos, and that turned Frankie's admiration for Wood into a kind of resentment. So, it's Wood who's protecting the fishmen and mermaids, huh? Luffy, Nami, and the others showed expressions of mild surprise. They had no idea that the dangerous figure Shaki had mentioned would turn out to be someone they knew, Wood. Back in Alabasta, Luffy and his crew had learned that Wood was indeed a big shot in the world and incredibly powerful to boot. But anyone who knew him personally would tell you. Wood's demeanor and personality were nothing like those of an underworld kingpin. In fact, he seemed no less ridiculous than Luffy himself. Wait, Luffy, are you saying you know Wood too? Frankie looked bewildered. He never imagined that this world could be so small. Luffy and his crew also had a connection to Wood. Since Frankie had joined the Straw Hats during the Water 7 arc, he hadn't known about Luffy's previous adventures, like their Alabasta experience where they first met Wood. Yeah, we met him in Alabasta. He's pretty weird, Luffy said, grinning. At this point, the only Straw Hats who hadn't met Wood were Chopper and Brook, who had joined during Thriller Bark. Thanks to Usopp's lectures. Chopper had pinned a super dangerous label on Wood, while Brook, searching his memories from 50 years ago, found no reference to Wood whatsoever and assumed that Wood wasn't much of a big deal back then. Because Fisher Tiger hadn't died, the Sun Pirates had remained intact, and Hooky and Kami were currently vacationing on Dark Abyss Island. Thus, the scenario where Kami was captured and put up for auction on Sabati didn't play out. However, like Frankie eventually joining the Straw Hats, the force of fate ensured that the Straw Hats still managed to get into trouble on Sabati. The trouble happened at the human auctioning house because Dark King Rayleigh had sold himself. Luffy and the others had to go there to retrieve Rayleigh, the man who was supposed to coat their ship for their journey to the New World. Who would have thought that, while celestial dragons typically had an eye only for beautiful slaves, this time one of them, St. Charlos, would suddenly decide he wanted this old geezer. Even if Charlos had bought Rayleigh, it was obvious that Rayleigh wouldn't allow himself to be taken to the Holy Land, marry Ijos. The celestial dragon's money would essentially be wasted. But the turning point came when Luffy spotted Rayleigh on stage, about to be bought, and decided on the spot to start bidding. Competing with Luffy were 2 other notorious rookies, the supernovas with the highest bounty on Sabati, Ustaz Kid, and Trafalgar Law, whose bounty ranked 5th. Unlike Luffy, who was simply trying to help a friend, Kid and Law recognized the old man on the stage as the legendary Dark King Rayleigh. 500,000 belly for the vice captain of the Pirate King? A steal. Kid thought, grinning as he raised his hand. He didn't think Rayleigh would join his crew, but spending a little to earn favor from a legend seemed worth it. 10 million belly. St. Carlos immediately shouted, his face twisted in anger. These commoners dared to challenge his authority as a world noble? 20 million belly. Luffy shouted immediately. Thanks to the gold they had sold from Skypiea, they still had plenty of funds. And as far as Luffy was concerned, Rayleigh was Frankie's friend. That made him their friend too. No amount of money was too much to save a friend. Even Nami, who loved money, knew this. Luffy, you can't just keep doubling the price. We aren't made of money, and it's provoking everyone else. Nami yelled, smacking Luffy on the head, leaving a massive bump. She took over the bidding herself. Most people bid slowly, raising by small increments to avoid overpaying. Nami had no problem spending money to save a friend, but she refused to waste it. It's okay, Nami. Luffy grinned. I just saw that guy in the bubble helmet do it. If we double it every time, it scares the others off, and they won't bid anymore. Look, it's gotten a lot quieter already. We've still got plenty of money, and we need to save Frankie's friend. 20 million belly was already a hefty sum for many pirate crews, and Kid and Law were starting to hesitate. Was it really worth spending that much just for Rayleigh's favor? But then, hearing Luffy's comment, Kid couldn't just sit back. They were all supernovas, after all. And all captains, too. Even though they hadn't reached the New World yet, the competition had clearly begun. 40 million belly. Straw Hat, you think you're the only one with money? That old man is mine. Kid shouted, his disdain for Luffy evident. Kid had never gotten along with Luffy. Their bounties were similar, with Kid's being slightly higher. But ever since arriving on the archipelago, Kid kept hearing the rumor that Luffy was the leader among the supernovas. The reason was simple, Luffy had taken down 2 warlords of the sea. Crocodile and Gecko Moria. As well as Rob Lucci, the most powerful agent of Cypher Pol 9 agent. In contrast, Kid's bounty came from his brutal actions, not from defeating powerful foes like Luffy had. The enemies Kid faced in the South Blue weren't nearly as significant as Luffy's adversaries, so it wasn't surprising that people considered Luffy superior. Kid had killed anyone spreading these rumors whenever he could, and Luffy's comment had certainly sounded like a challenge to him. Boring. Bippo, let's go. Law said, waving his hand dismissively. He was clearly more level-headed than Kid. He had no interest in a meaningless competition, but then Kid sneered. What? Giving up already, Trafalgar? Law paused, gripping his long sword. You must be Trafalgar Law, captain of the Heart Pirates, right? 5th rank bounty? Are you giving up because you know you can't win? Kid mocked. A bounty doesn't mean anything. Law replied coldly. And you think winning a bidding war makes you superior, Kid? Kid leaned back in his seat, smirking arrogantly. All I know is that a crew's wealth is part of its strength. Right now, the Kid Pirates and the Straw Hat Pirates are just stronger than your Heart Pirates. Kid's mocking expression infuriated Law. Either because Luffy's antics had lowered everyone's intelligence, or because Luffy's stupidity was simply that contagious, Law found himself getting swept up in the auction, eventually calling out 50 million belly. Kid laughed even harder, his arrogance growing. Things were getting interesting now. He would prove once and for all that he was number one among this generation of supernovas. Hearing the new high bid of 50 million belly, Nami was dumbfounded. In her mind, there was no way this old man was worth that kind of money. Their doctor, Chopper, is worth 50 belly. Nami thought incredulously. That means they could buy 1 million choppers for the same price as one old man. Why spend all that on an old guy when you could buy Chopper instead? Chopper came with medical skills, fighting prowess, and could even keep you warm on cold nights. What could an old drunk like Rayleigh do? The auctioneer was equally confused, eyeing Rayleigh with suspicion. Could there be something special about him? But no matter how he looked, Rayleigh seemed like nothing more than a drunken old man. The old man stood on the platform, shackled around the neck, wrists, and ankles, yet he remained utterly calm. He even pulled out a bottle of alcohol from somewhere and drank it straight from the bottle before lying down and dozing off, as if completely indifferent to his fate. 50 million belly. The young man in a hat bids 50 million. Anyone else care to bid higher? He may just look like an ordinary old man, but with 3 supernova crews fighting over him, maybe he's hiding some big secret, or maybe he's someone really important. The auctioneer didn't understand why the price had soared so high, but he knew how to fan the flames, skillfully playing on everyone's curiosity. He had watched the price climb from mere hundreds of thousands of belly to 50 million and was already thinking about how much commission he would get. Little did he know, the tall tales he spun were true. The so-called old drunk was indeed the former vice captain of the Pirate King, the legendary Dark King Rayleigh. A big name, For sure. And since he had been to Laugh Tale, he truly did know some incredible secrets. 60 million belly. Kid's taunt had Luffy completely forgetting Nami's advice. He shouted out his new bid with excitement. They were all supernovas, all captains, and thanks to Kid's provocations, this auction had turned into a clash of the three pirate crews. There was no way Luffy was backing down now. Chapter 390, the patron behind the Celestial Dragon's 60 million belly was no small sum. Even those pirates and wealthy individuals who had initially intended to join in had now withdrawn, instead watching Luffy and the others put on their spectacle. While Luffy and his fellow captains continued their bidding war with enthusiasm, they seemed to forget one crucial detail. They weren't the only ones in the auction house. There were others here, like the world nobles, the Celestial Dragons. Would the Celestial Dragons, with their haughty attitudes, simply let a few so-called low-life pirates outbid them? If they allowed mere commoners to take away something they wanted, how could they ever maintain their prestige in Merry Ijos? They'd be seen as a disgrace among the other noble families. 100 million belly. Charlos Saint raised one finger and shouted, sneering as he glanced at the three captains already in a heated fight. If you're going to bid, then bid big. Adding a mere 10 million belly each time? What small-minded behavior. Charlos Saint didn't care much about Rayleigh himself. The old man was just fodder in his eyes. But the pride of the Celestial Dragons could not be challenged. The actions of Luffy, Kid, and Law had clearly enraged him. So now, even though Rayleigh was just some old drunk, Charlos would do whatever it took to buy him, if only to show these pirates where they stood. To prove that, no matter how super they thought they were, these upstart pirates were just ants compared to the world nobles. With the Celestial Dragons joining the fray, Law immediately wanted to back out. Even Kid, arrogant as he was, knew how much trouble it would be to provoke a Celestial Dragon on this island, and his face twisted in frustration. 110 million belly. Luffy shouted with his usual carefree expression. Both Kid and Law stared at him, utterly stunned. Straw Hat, are you insane? Do you realize you're provoking a Celestial Dragon? Law snapped. Having spent his early years among the Don Quixote family, he knew better than most just how troublesome the Celestial Dragons could be. The Don Quixote family was powerful, but even then, Doflamingo often had to watch his steps around the Celestial Dragons. I don't care if they're Celestial Dragons or Celestial Worms. Luffy said with a shrug. That old man is Frankie's friend, so we're going to save him. Besides, he's supposed to code our ship for us. The term Celestial Dragon seemed vaguely familiar to Luffy, but expecting him to remember something he had no personal connection with was a tall order. To him, Frankie's earlier warnings had already been tossed to the back of his mind, and even if he did remember, it wouldn't have changed his decision. Turns out he's just a complete idiot. Kid muttered in disgust, his disdain palpable. He couldn't believe he had considered such a simple-minded guy as his competition. If you're scared, you can back out. Luffy said. Because from here on out, it's a match between my crew and that Celestial Worm. Who are you calling scared? Kid and Law shouted in unison, clearly bristling at Luffy's taunt. It was obvious, even if Luffy hadn't intended it, that his words were a provocation. And for someone like Kid, whose pride often dictated his actions, it was enough to get him fired up again. Kid and Law had no intention of angering the Celestial Dragons, but if they backed down now, wouldn't that be the same as admitting they were afraid? That they weren't as brave as Straw Hat Luffy? 120 million belly. They both shouted almost simultaneously. Their antics, however, had finally managed to draw some real ire from those around them. Charlos Saint's face, visible beneath his bubble helmet, had turned an alarming shade of red, and even his dangling snot had almost been forgotten in his rage. If Luffy and the others had simply overlooked the fact that he was a Celestial Dragon, Charlos might have ignored their actions. But now, after making such a high-profile bid, these pirates still dared to challenge him, even raising the stakes further? That was nothing less than trampling on the dignity of the Celestial Dragons. Charlos Saint didn't bother bidding any higher. Instead, consumed by anger, he pulled out his pistol, immediately deciding to take action. You lowly scum, all of you should just die. In most parts of Sabati Archipelago, using weapons was strictly prohibited, and doing so would attract the Marines. Moreover, this auction house was backed by a major underworld player, and anyone causing trouble here would undoubtedly earn the wrath of Don Quixote Doflamingo, the infamous underworld broker known as Joker. But those rules applied only to ordinary people. When it came to the Celestial Dragons, no such restrictions existed. Charlos Saint pulled out his gun and fired several shots in the direction of the three captains. He assumed, as always, that the rebellious peasants would soon fall before his shots, their bodies collapsing in pools of blood. But not this time. The bullets aimed at Luffy simply bounced off his rubbery body, rebounding harmlessly. The ones fired at Law disappeared into thin air, swallowed by his room ability and reappearing somewhere else. As for Kid, the bullets stopped midair, seemingly losing all momentum and floating under the influence of magnetic purple sparks. Against the 3 pirate captains, all with bounties averaging nearly 300 million belly, regular bullets did nothing. Had the bullets been made of sea stone, perhaps they would have posed some threat. But the ammunition Charlos Saint carried was meant for commoners. Using sea stone bullets was costly, and Charlos had never bothered to carry such rare ammunition just to shoot peasants. Seeing that the pirates had come out unscathed, Charlos realized they must all be devil fruit users. Slowly, he took out a sea stone bullet, starting to reload his weapon. Charlos moved as if he were untouchable because, in his mind, he was. No one would dare lay a hand on a world noble. People might run or beg for mercy, but they would never dare fight back. That's why he reloaded his gun without a care in the world. Unfortunately for him, Charlos had made a terrible miscalculation. A certain straw-hatted boy had no clue who or what a celestial dragon even was. Seeing Charlos fire at him, Luffy took it as a personal challenge. With a swift motion, he disappeared from his spot and appeared in front of the noble, punching him and sending him flying across the room. Unlike in the original timeline, Luffy wasn't furious when he struck, so Charlos wasn't fatally injured. He was merely sent crashing several meters away. Still, that single punch was enough to escalate the situation. Once everyone realized what had just happened, panic spread like wildfire throughout the auction house. People began scrambling for the exits like frightened birds. A celestial dragon had been punched. This place. No, this entire island was no longer safe to stay on. It wouldn't be long before the Marines descended on them, treating everyone as accomplices. Are you completely insane? The rumors were right. Straw Hat Luffy really is as reckless as they say. No, this is even worse than what I'd heard. Kid and Law's faces were both grim. They had wanted to hit the celestial dragon who had shot at them, too, but the threat of an admiral coming to the island had kept them from acting on impulse. They had exercised restraint, but apparently, the idiot standing next to them didn't know the meaning of the word. Looks like I arrived a bit late. Missed out on the good part, didn't I? A voice cut through the tension, causing everyone to turn. But just a friendly reminder, if you lot keep standing around arguing, the Marines are gonna have you all surrounded real soon. I saw quite a number of them gathering on my way here. It was Wood, standing there with Robin and his newest recruit, Perona. He had came to Sabati to witness the drama unfolding, but he'd arrived just a little too late. Charlos was already down, his face swollen like a pig's from the beating he had received. The Marines, having understood the gravity of the situation, were already gathering outside. They knew the consequences would be severe if anything happened to a celestial dragon. Wood? The Marine defector Wood? What are you doing here? Everyone. The Straw Hats, Kid, Law, and even Rayleigh looked genuinely surprised to see Wood standing there. Rayleigh was one thing. He was a relic from the past, long retired. But Wood was different, he was a force to be reckoned with, one of the current powers of the sea. Kid and Law couldn't understand why someone of his stature would show up in a place like this. Would you believe me if I said I was just passing by? Wood said with a grin. Luffy punching a celestial dragon, Admiral Kizaru unleashing his wrath on the supernovas. With so much chaos about to happen, Wood couldn't resist the temptation to come and see it all firsthand. But much to his disappointment, by the time he got there, Charlos had already been laid out flat. He couldn't help but wonder what exactly had led to this mess. Hucky and Kami were still on Dark Abyss Island, so why had Luffy and his crew ended up brawling with a celestial dragon? Ah, perfect timing, Mr. Wood. A voice called out, sounding unexpectedly joyful. Everyone turned to see a figure approaching, her bubble helmet reflecting the lights of the auction house. Recognizing Wood, it wasn't just the pirates. Even one of the celestial dragons knew who he was. Please, Wood, help us out and execute these lowly scum who dared to defy the Roswad family. You'll be handsomely rewarded, I assure you. The woman who spoke was Lulyetin the Roswad, daughter of Roswad Saint and younger sister of Charlos Saint. A member of the world nobles. The reason she knew Wood was simple. Wood and the Golden Emperor Tetsuro had business dealings with many of the so-called world nobles. In reality, many of them were financially dependent on these two men. Even among the celestial dragons, there were distinctions between families, and while they all acted superior in front of ordinary people, there was still a hierarchy among themselves. They were all descendants of the creators. But since their statuses were essentially equal, the way to establish higher social standing came from other means, such as financial power or influence. Most of the celestial dragons were parasites, living off of the heavenly tribute paid by the nations under their control. But if everyone received the same tribute, how could any one family distinguish itself? This was why many celestial dragon families sought external support. Connections that provided them wealth, power, and influence in exchange for political favors. Just as Doflamingo had powerful allies within the world government, there were plenty of world nobles who had their own arrangements. Without a doubt, Tetsuro, the so-called richest man alive, and Wood, who held a monopoly on the world's arms trade, were prime candidates for such alliances. Between the two of them, they had wealth, connections, and military power. Everything that certain celestial dragons craved. The Roswad family had become one of Wood and Tetsuro's allies, and in exchange for more support, they had even offered to make Wood a celestial dragon himself. It would be simple. He only needed to marry their eldest daughter, Lulietta, and take on the Roswad name. Of course, Wood had refused. It wasn't that 17-year-old Lulietta was unattractive. On the contrary, she was rather striking. But Wood had no interest in becoming one of those pompous buffoons waddling around in a bloated bubble suit. Besides, it was clear as day that the celestial dragons were the villains of this world. Getting chummy with them would only make him a target for the protagonists and the Revolutionary Army. There was no way he was about to sign up for that kind of trouble. Chapter 391, The Laid-Back Admiral appears. The celestial dragons look down upon all other beings outside their own circle, but even they have a peculiar respect for special benefactors like Wood and Tetsuro. In fact, to secure more wealth for their lavish spending, Wood and Tetsuro had gathered quite a few celestial dragon lackeys. Tetsuro, who once served as a slave to the celestial dragons, reveled in the twisted satisfaction of now using money to control them, and he even harbored thoughts of marrying into their ranks to dismantle and absorb them from within. Wood had warned Tetsuro several times, reminding him that villains were often just experience points for the main characters. Following such cliched paths could easily lead to unexpected consequences. But Tetsuro was blinded by his desire for revenge, unable to heed Wood's warnings, driven by his lingering need to avenge his lost love. Unable to dissuade him, Wood eventually chose to cut off some of their cooperative ventures with Tetsuro through the Wood Weapons Company. Wood knew that, given his current resources and influence, he could stand on his own in the seas without relying on Tetsuro, the economic powerhouse. It was no surprise that Lulietta Roswad sought help from Wood. To her, they were still business partners, and if the Roswad family perished here, it could negatively affect Wood's business. At first, Lulietta found it hard to believe that anyone in the world would dare attack them. But upon seeing her father, Roswad Saint, and her brother, Charlo Saint, lying on the ground foaming at the mouth, she began to panic. These peasants were truly crazy. Lulietta did not want to end up like her father and brother, bruised, bloody, and sprawled out on the ground, nor did she want to be killed here. If she were to die, what good would the Marine Admirals avenging her death be? How could the life of some lowly pirates compare to hers, Lulietta Roswad? She had heard of Wood's reputation on the sea. Not only was he the world's biggest arms dealer, but Lulietta also knew that he was a powerful combatant. The guards and slaves around her were no longer reliable, they had all been beaten down by Luffy and the others. Lulietta could only hope Wood would help her. Upon hearing Lulietta's plea, both Kid and Law turned to Wood with wary expressions. Wood's reputation preceded him. As a presence rivaling that of the four emperors, even the proudest of the supernovas, Eustace Kid, understood he stood no chance against Wood at this stage. If even Kid felt that way, Law certainly didn't think otherwise. To Law, Wood was even something of a benefactor, which was why he had addressed him as Mr. Wood earlier. Law had a deeper understanding of Wood's strength compared to Kid. Though he had been young, Law had witnessed Wood in action before. The very man Law feared, Don Quixote Doflamingo, had been humiliated by Wood over a decade ago. And now, Wood had become someone even Doflamingo feared to provoke. "I'm sorry, Lady Lulietta," Wood said casually. "While I may be a pirate of some capability, the three before you are not ordinary pirates either. They are the supernovas, each with bounties ranging from 200 million to 310 million belly. Combined, their total bounty isn't far off from my 10 billion belly bounty. If it's just me alone, there's no guarantee I'd be able to take on all three. So, killing them is out of the question, but I can at least make sure you don't get hurt." Lulietta clearly lacked common sense when it came to the concept of strong pirates on the Grand Line. She had heard that pirate strength was determined by bounty, and if the combined bounties of these three pirates came close to 10 billion belly, it made sense that Wood might not be able to beat them. However, Lulietta overlooked a crucial detail: even combined, Luffy, Kid, and Law's bounties did not add up to 10 billion belly. Moreover, Wood's bounty had remained stagnant at 10 billion belly for years only because the Marines had stopped actively pursuing him due to his relationship with the Celestial Dragons. Had the Marines still been after him, Wood's bounty would easily have reached 30 billion belly after his recent skirmishes with Big Mom and Kaido. Luffy wasn't interested in fighting a woman. Kid, unlike Luffy, wasn't reckless enough to attack a Celestial Dragon. And Law? He was even more prudent than Kid. Besides, given how Wood had spoken, It was only proper to show some respect. Ustaz Kid, Straw Hat Luffy, Trafalgar Law. You are completely surrounded by the Navy. Luffy had wanted to catch up with Wood, maybe even test out his recent gains and settle the score from their fight back in Alabasta. But just then, a standard Marine declaration echoed from outside the auction hall. The Marines outside the auction house were stationed on Sabati Archipelago, led by a Marine captain. The speaker was one of their subordinates, a Marine lieutenant. The Grand Line was dotted with various Marine branches, and although Sabati Archipelago was close to Marine headquarters, it was still considered an outpost. Compared to other Marine branches, Sabati's position was particularly thankless. Unlike other branches, which were far removed from headquarters and could get away with slacking off, Sabati was too close to headquarters for that. Additionally, the high number of pirates and criminals made the workload almost unbearable. However, while the workload was heavy, there was one advantage: proximity to Marine headquarters meant that Sabati was absolutely safe. There was no chance of the branch being wiped out by a powerful pirate crew like in other regions. But today, as the Marine captain stationed on Sabati was about to take a coffee break amidst his heavy workload, a messenger ran in, breathless, with an urgent report. A world noble, a celestial dragon, has been attacked by the supernovas on the island. Heavens have mercy. Upon hearing the news, the Marine captain's head began to buzz. He knew exactly what kind of trouble came with a celestial dragon being attacked. If anything went wrong, their entire contingent would face severe consequences. The captain looked at the wanted posters that had been handed to him by a sergeant. Staring at the faces of Luffy, Kid, and Law, his face darkened further. The culprits were 3 individuals with bounties exceeding 100 million belly each, and as the captain scanned through their files, it was clear none of them were easy to deal with. Especially the Straw Hat Kid, grinning like a fool. He had already taken down one of the warlords of the sea. Despite the headaches that came with the task, the Marine captain quickly gathered his forces and surrounded the slave auction house. They had no choice. Even though these supernovas were far from pushovers, duty dictated that they act, no matter how outmatched they were. Captain, we've got the entire slave auction house surrounded, but no one has come out yet. There's no sign of the Roswad family either. After setting up a perimeter and bringing out all the weapons they had, the Marine sergeant saluted and reported to the captain. Have we contacted headquarters? The enemies are supernovas with average bounties of 300 million. There's no way we can stop them with just our current forces. We need more reinforcements. The captain had already ordered headquarters to be contacted as soon as they set off. He reported that they were in the middle of an intense firefight with the pirates responsible for attacking the celestial dragons, stating that their forces were vastly outmatched, and they were suffering heavy losses. Whether or not they were actually fighting was irrelevant for now. What mattered was to show that they were putting up a valiant effort. Later, if they were held accountable, they could say they did all they could. Headquarters has responded. They've asked us to hold out a little longer. Vice Admiral Santomaru, along with the latest pacifista prototypes, is on the way. As for additional support, given the involvement of the Celestial Dragons, Headquarters has decided to dispatch one of the admirals, Kizaru, to deal with the pirates. Hearing that an admiral had been dispatched, the Marine captain felt his confidence swell. Admirals were the peak of Marine power, rivaling, or perhaps surpassing, the 4 emperors. Dealing with some supernovas would be child's play for an admiral. Maybe this would be his ticket to getting out of this hellhole assignment, perhaps even earning him some commendations. Inside the auction house, Luffy, Kid, and Law realized that an admiral would soon be arriving, so they decided it was time to make their escape. For the 3 supernovas, the Marines stationed in Sabati were far from a threat. The trio's combined devil fruit abilities made short work of the Marines, leaving them scattered and broken. The entire archipelago fell into chaos. Cannons fired, and several areas were reduced to rubble due to the bombardment. Amidst the sudden turmoil, numerous pirates took advantage of the confusion, hoping to loot as much as possible before making a quick getaway. But as a cannonball soared through the air above Sabati Archipelago, a man with wavy black hair, wearing sunglasses and dressed in a yellow striped suit, appeared atop it, looking both flamboyant and sleazy. Yasukuni no Magatama. From high above, Kizaru struck a bizarre pose, and in the next instant, countless beams of light began raining down from the sky, blanketing the area below. The light bullets fell like a torrential rain, an area of effect attack that covered a wide radius. For the average pirates caught within this barrage, there was no hope of escape. Some tried to block the beams with their swords, but it was either too late or completely ineffective. The beams cut through metal like butter, piercing both weapons and the bodies of those wielding them. So this is the power of a Marine Admiral, Kizaru. One pirate muttered bitterly as he tried to flee. Damn it, who was the idiot that punched a celestial dragon and got us all in this mess? With an admiral on the scene, the pirates had only one option. Run. Fighting was not an option, not when facing a Marine Admiral, one of the strongest figures in the world. Even the supernovas, for all their strength, were nothing but children compared to an admiral. Captain, we have to get out of here. Admiral Kizaru is here. If we don't leave now, we're all going to die. A pirate, sporting a generic look, tried to convince his captain, a blonde man, to flee. But the captain, Hawkins, merely stared at his tarot cards, unmoved by the urgency in his subordinate's voice. Escape survival probability, 10%. Chance of victory in combat, 0.1%. Standing our ground, survival probability, 80%. As he spoke, Hawkins revealed the final tarot card in his hand, adding, "Relax. Today is not the day I see my demise. We will survive this." The crewmate, looking back and forth between his calm captain and the approaching Admiral Kizaru, couldn't match Hawkins' composure. Without another word, he turned and ran. Under normal circumstances, Hawkins' crew trusted his readings. But this time, Kizaru was standing right there, and Hawkins had just claimed that their chances of surviving by staying put were higher than running. It was absurd. Unfortunately for the fleeing pirate, his decision would cost him dearly. He hadn't made it far when a beam of golden light caught up to him in an instant, piercing straight through his heart. "I told you, didn't I? The chance of survival when running is only 10%. Why couldn't you believe it?" Hawkins sighed. After swiftly dispatching the fleeing pirate, Kizaru turned his attention to Hawkins, pointing his fingers and firing off a series of golden beams. For anyone without observation hockey, evading Kizaru's light-speed attacks was impossible. Even a supernova couldn't hope to dodge such an assault using only their eyes. Beams shot through Hawkins, but strangely, there was no blood, nor did he appear to be in pain. Instead, a series of burnt straw figures fell from his body. Basil Hawkins, bounty of 249 million belly. So that's your power, huh? Looks like it's not a Logia type, since it has a physical form. Kizaru said with a wry smile. But still, you supernovas. You guys are all monsters. An old guy like me, just a step away from retirement, wouldn't want to get taken down by one of you, would I? Chapter 392, A True Swordsman, Who Can Cut Even Light. As Admiral Kizaru finished speaking, his body was suddenly severed into two parts, without any warning. The one who attacked was also one of the supernovas on the island. Scratchman Apu, with a bounty of 198 million belly, ranked 6th among the supernovas, was the captain of the on-air pirates. He was a user of the sound fruit, capable of launching invisible sound-based attacks. However, his sneak attack proved ineffective. Since Kizaru possessed the Logia glint fruit, his body could turn into light particles, allowing him to easily reform after being split apart. Realizing that his sneak attack had failed, Apu followed the rule of show-off, then run to the letter, immediately turning to flee without a moment's hesitation. But no matter how fast Apu could run, could he really outrun the speed of light? Having already dashed several hundred meters away, Apu barely had time to check whether he was being pursued when golden particles materialized in front of him, forming the shape of Admiral Kizaru. Have you ever been kicked at the speed of light? Kizaru, the master of relaxed combat, lived up to his reputation as the Marine's biggest slacker. When fighting Hawkins earlier, he kept firing deadly light beams, and now, even though he could easily have struck Apu down with a beam from a distance, he chose instead to flash step to Apu's position to show off his leg. A golden flash moved across the air. Not the entrance of a ninja with a kunai, but rather a size 45 boot that planted directly into Apu's face. Without any resistance, Apu's body flew backward like a kite without a string, speeding past Hawkins and smashing through a building. "Wow, that was scary. I almost died just now," Kizaru remarked. Kizaru had effortlessly taken out another supernova, yet he made a show of pretending to be scared, as if he had barely survived. "Hey, if you have any tricks up your sleeve, you'd better use them now. If this keeps up, we'll all die here," Apu said to Hawkins, who stood nearby. As one of the members of the worst generation, Apu knew that while the supernovas hadn't yet fully grown, they weren't weak enough to be taken out by Kizaru with one casual kick. It seems that even if there's an 80% survival chance from staying put, that remaining 20% chance of death still requires my own effort to avoid. Devil's contract. Hawkins' body began to transform, with straw wrapping around him and rapidly expanding. Soon, his small frame grew into a massive straw figure towering tens of meters tall. Holding a large sword, the massive scarecrow swung down, creating powerful air pressure that formed a shockwave, causing the ground to split apart. However, it was all in vain. Despite gaining a giant's size and strength, Hawkins, lacking armament hockey, was unable to harm Kizaru, even if the Admiral stood still and let him attack. Kizaru's body, split in two by the shockwave, reformed rapidly, and several light beams shot forth, easily piercing the massive scarecrow's vital points. The scarecrow form did not make Hawkins invincible. Every time the scarecrow took damage, Hawkins' real body shared the consequences. Hawkins wasn't immortal. He merely transferred damage to other individuals who served as substitutes. The small straw figures that fell from his body were the unlucky recipients of the damage meant for him. But under Kizaru's relentless assault, Hawkins, in his giant scarecrow form, grew increasingly worried. He wasn't a Logia-type devil fruit user, he still had a physical body, and the number of substitutes he could use was not limitless. With Kizaru's continued attacks, Hawkins' stock of straw men was dwindling rapidly. Once they were all used up, it would spell his demise. My prediction said there was an 80% chance of survival, but this situation feels like certain death. With only 2 or 3 straw men left, Hawkins finally began to panic. His once unwavering faith in his own fortune was now wavering. Just as Hawkins hesitated, wondering if he should try to escape before his substitutes were exhausted, a massive shadow suddenly fell from the sky, crashing down onto Kizaru's location. Boom. When the dust settled, Apu and Hawkins could see the giant figure clearly. It was Bartholomew Kuma, one of the 7 warlords of the sea, famously known as the world government's most loyal servant. However, this tyrant Kuma was lying battered in a crater, his body exposing mechanical parts and sparking wires. So this is the so-called pacifista. A human weapon developed by the Marines using Bartholomew Kuma as the prototype? This thing's really only good for its tough exterior and laser blasts. It can't even dodge attacks, and it's basically just a glorified target. A voice called out from nearby. 3 figures approached the area where the Kuma-like robot had fallen. Besides the gothic Lolita girl holding a black parasol, the other 2 figures were immediately recognizable to Hawkins and Apu. It was none other than Nico Robin, known as the Devil's Child. And the infamous Navy deserter Wood, who was associated with the ancient weapon title. Seeing Wood arrive, Hawkins immediately understood where the supposed 80% survival chance had come from. There were not many people in the world who could go toe-to-toe with a Marine Admiral, but Wood was definitely one of them. Boom. A golden flash appeared in the air, followed by a powerful shockwave that blew everything in the vicinity apart. Standing before Wood was Kizaru, wielding a massive golden lightsaber, clashing against Wood's cursed sword, Tenku. Their clash instantly caused the ground beneath them to collapse, and a circular shockwave spread out for hundreds of meters around them. Admiral Kizaru, you're a Marine Admiral, right? Isn't it a bit much to ambush a lowly pirate like me? As sparks flew between Kizaru's Amano Murakamo sword and the cursed blade Tenku, Wood smiled wryly, his relaxed stance belying the strength with which he was meeting the force of a Marine Admiral. How terrifying. If I recall, you graduated a few years after me from the Navy Academy, didn't you? I heard you were one of Instructor Zephyr's star pupils. I didn't believe it back then, but now I see you are indeed as fearsome as they say. Kizaru remarked casually. Despite his relaxed words, Kizaru was giving no quarter. The 2 figures, one in golden light and the other dark as shadow, collided repeatedly, each clash resulting in massive damage to the surrounding area. The Sabati archipelago was formed by the giant Yarukiman mangroves. Trees so large that their roots, intertwined, made up entire islands. Yet the battle between Wood and Kizaru was not just fast, the sheer destruction was immense. Underneath the massive trees, the 2 figures moved faster than the eye could see, their fight carrying them from the ground to the treetops. 100 demon sword style, wind element, 1 sword slash, Atachi. With a swift stroke, Wood swung the cursed blade Tenku, which shimmered in a metallic black. A fierce gust of wind was unleashed, forming a crescent moon that grew to hundreds of meters as it approached Kizaru. Since the attack was imbued with armament hockey, Kizaru chose not to risk letting his body become light particles. Instead, he used his glint fruit ability to instantly relocate elsewhere. The massive black crescent, missing its intended target, hit one of the Yarukiman mangrove trees. What happened next shocked every Marine and pirate watching. The tree trunk, with a radius of almost a kilometer, was cleanly severed by wood slash. To put this into perspective, the Sabati archipelago is made up of 79 Yarukiman mangroves, and Wood had just sliced one of them in half with a single attack. Watching the fight between Wood and Kizaru, Hawkins and Apu, 2 of the supernovas, were left with their mouths agape. The true power of the Grand Line's strongest far exceeded their expectations. Any arrogance they had felt as supernovas was shattered entirely. Judging by the scale of the fight, it was clear that Kizaru had been holding back when dealing with them. If he had fought them with even half the intensity he was showing against Wood, they wouldn't have stood a chance. One of the Yarukiman mangroves had fallen, and as the battle between Wood and Kizaru continued to escalate, the entire island began to quake. Golden light beams and sword energy burst forth from the battle zone, destroying buildings and leaving massive craters in the ground and deep gashes as if carved by a canyon. Yatano Kagami. Kizaru used reflected light to move at near light speed, appearing behind Wood, swinging the Amano Morakamo sword down at him. But Wood parried the strike with a different sword. Asatsu. 100 Demon Sword Style, Fire Element, 1 Sword Slash, Phoenix Fire. Using Asatsu to block the golden blade, Wood swung Tenku with his other hand, unleashing a fiery attack that morphed into a blazing phoenix, aimed straight at Kizaru. The Glint fruit was one of the most powerful Logia types, excelling not just in attack and defense, but also in speed. Due to this, Kizaru often relied heavily on his devil fruit abilities in combat. He knew that the natural counter to Logia users was Armament Haki, which could nullify his intangibility. That's why he wouldn't risk turning into light when he saw Wood imbuing his blade with Armament Haki. But when the flaming slash approached, Kizaru was sure he saw clearly that Wood hadn't used Haki to coat his sword. Kizaru intended to use his light-based form to endure the attack, certain that without Haki, not even the most skilled swordsman could harm his intangible form. That was the logic of this world, the established rule acknowledged by all. Yet, as the uncoated fiery slash approached, Kizaru felt an inexplicable sense of danger. In the last moment, Kizaru trusted his instincts. The stronger the fighter, the more they trusted such inexplicable feelings. It was too late to evade fully, and the slash grazed him. Blood sprayed into the air as the flaming slash crashed into the harbor of Sabati Archipelago, slicing through several pirate ships attempting to flee and evaporating large swathes of seawater. But Kizaru wasn't concerned about the destroyed ships. Covering his bleeding arm, he looked at Wood, stunned. "You didn't use Armament Haki. How were you able to injure me? Even if your sword were made of sea stone, it wouldn't work unless it directly touched my body." Kizaru's shock was understandable. Until now, it had been accepted that only sea stone and Armament Haki could counter a Logia user's intangibility. If Wood could harm a Logia user without using either of these, it meant he had discovered some new power or perhaps developed a new technique altogether. After all, the Wood Weapons Company was known for being the most advanced weapons manufacturer on the seas. If Wood had invented something new, it wouldn't be entirely unexpected. A true swordsman has no limits on what they can cut. Not even light can escape. Wood declared with a smirk, waving his blade to extinguish the remaining flames, exuding an aura of confidence. Kizaru's expression shifted, his usually aloof demeanor now touched by a hint of intrigue and concern. The power to harm a Logia user without sea stone or Haki? It was beyond any conventional understanding of the world's fighting capabilities. All those witnessing the fight, Marines, pirates, and the supernovas alike, began to realize they were witnessing something new, something that could change the established rules of power on the Grand Line. Chapter 393, Workers can accept emotions, but not pay cuts. There was a reason Wood managed to injure Kizaru without relying on Armament Haki. It wasn't because the Wood Weapons Company had invented some new technology, but rather due to a new power Wood had acquired during his recent simulation training. The Blessing of the Sword Saint. This ability allowed Wood to fully unleash the strength of his sword and gave him the capability to cut through things that were considered uncuttable. If Wood could slash Perona's intangible negative ghosts, then naturally, Logia Devil Fruit users in their elemental form were not an exception. Just moments earlier, Kizaru had barely dodged Wood's flaming strike, but his negligence led to his right hand being injured, the wound still bleeding profusely. Just like Instructor Zephyr always said, Admiral Kizaru relies too much on his devil fruit abilities, and one day, it will backfire. "I never expected that the one to make that happen would be someone like me, just a junior. What an honor," Wood said, smirking. Seeing Wood's casual, almost mocking demeanor, Kizaru considered going all out, truly unleashing his full strength. But given the current situation, he had to exercise caution. His main objective this time was to protect the celestial dragons on the island and, secondly, capture the pirates. Fighting Wood was more of a personal whim. Sure, he could go head-to-head with Wood, but that would mean the entire Sabati Archipelago would be destroyed in the crossfire, including the celestial dragons present on the island. Wood was a pirate, a big one at that, someone the world government couldn't effectively control. If the situation escalated, Wood could just escape and go back to roaming the seas, free as ever. But Kizaru was different. He was under the world government and the Marines. If the celestial dragons died under his watch, then he would be entirely blamed. In that case, he'd be demoted all the way back to tending pigs in his hometown. He might enjoy being laid back, but Kizaru certainly wasn't willing to lose his cushy job. Why give up a high salary and easy work for a mere personal dispute? As one of the big names of the New World, why aren't you staying in your own territory? What brings you here? Is it for these pirates? Among these so-called supernovas, is there someone you know or favor? Kizaru asked. Having lost all interest in fighting, Kizaru instead embraced his philosophy of slacking justice, opting to chat with Wood. After all, They wouldn't be able to determine a winner quickly even if they continued to fight. Instead of wasting energy, Kizaru figured they might as well talk. Perhaps he could extract some useful information from Wood. Why are you all so curious about why I came to Sabati Archipelago? I already said I came here just to watch the show, but none of you seem to believe it. Among the supernovas on the island, there are indeed a few youngsters who caught my attention, but even if I didn't intervene, they'd still be able to leave safely this time. Maybe you don't know, Admiral Kizaru, but despite how chaotic this island appears, there are quite a few powerful figures hiding here. For instance, a certain former first mate of the Pirate King. Wood said, grinning. Hearing this, the person in question, who was hiding in a corner enjoying the drama, suddenly lost his good mood. The former first mate of the Pirate King, Silver's Rayleigh, had been observing the chaos while munching on snacks. When he saw Luffy, wearing his iconic straw hat, punch a celestial dragon, Rayleigh had immediately taken a liking to him. The reason Rayleigh was in the vicinity in the first place was to help stop Kizaru, giving the young pirates a chance to set sail. But before he could take action, Wood had unexpectedly intervened, and Kizaru had focused on Wood instead. Rayleigh was naturally happy to avoid a fight. After all, he was getting old, and battling an admiral wasn't exactly how he wanted to spend his time. And even though Rayleigh had been living in Sabiti for some time, managing Shaki's information network meant he was well aware of who Wood was. Even if they'd never met in person. However, any favorable impression Rayleigh had of Wood disappeared the moment Wood mentioned him to Kizaru. You guys can fight each other all you want. Why drag me into this? Do you think it's easy finding a quiet place to retire? Rayleigh grumbled internally. Sabati Archipelago was full of rich marks, with its booming slave market. Rayleigh could easily sell himself every now and then just to afford some more booze. But if the Marines found out that the former right-hand man of the Pirate King was living right under their noses, how could he ever live in peace again? Wood wasn't exaggerating. The situation on Sabati might seem chaotic. With Admiral Kizaru on the island, Sentomaru bringing several pacifistas, easily overwhelming pirates with bounties in the hundreds of millions, and with the Navy's massive fleet blockading the island. But the truth was, the supernovas would still make it out. The pirates had no way of heading towards the Red Line. Passing near the Marine headquarters would be suicidal. Their only path forward was to dive below the waves to Fishman Island, 10,000 meters beneath the sea. And if their ship wasn't properly coded? Well, then, they were out of luck. The situation looked great for the Marines. They had the Admiral, the pacifistas, and they had the numbers. But despite their strength, not a single one of the 11 supernovas on the island was captured. Who would believe that if you told them? Kizaru worked hard at slacking off. Though he could easily have taken down the supernovas one by one, he somehow made it seem like the fight was evenly matched. Sentomaru and the pacifistas seemed on the verge of wiping out the Straw Hat crew, but then Bartholomew Kuma appeared and stole the kill. One by one, he slapped the Straw Hats away, giving them a way to escape and a chance for future growth. Sentomaru, wearing his gut guard and wielding his massive axe, was left dumbfounded, wondering why Kuma had interfered. He had almost finished off the Straw Hats, and Kuma's actions seemed entirely unnecessary. It wasn't until 2 years later, when the Straw Hats regrouped and Sentomaru encountered them again, that he realized he had been betrayed by his own teammate. Unfortunately, by the time, it was too late to settle things with Kuma, who had become nothing more than a mindless weapon in the hands of the world government. All Sentomaru could do was hold his axe and cry like the giant-sized man he was. In short, if the Marines had not sent Kizaru and Kuma to Sabiti, but only Sentomaru with 10 pacifistas, then, regardless of what happened to the Straw Hat crew, at least one of the 11 supernovas would have been caught. But with a slacking admiral and a secret turncoat both present, the outcome was set before the battle even began. All 11 supernovas either fled or were slapped away, but none were captured. The Marines caught plenty of nameless pirates, but they failed to capture the main culprit, Monkey D. Luffy, or even used Ass Kid and Trafalgar Law, who had been collateral damage. This infuriated the Celestial Dragons. The main forces responsible for supporting the operation were led by Kizaru, who was later scolded harshly by Fleet Admiral Sengoku. An admiral, the Marines' highest combat force, supported by 10 of the latest pacifistas, had failed to capture even a single rookie pirate. The Celestial Dragons were furious, doubting the competency of the Marine admirals, and decided to have their funding for the next year. Faced with budget cuts, Sengoku was also infuriated, and decided to dock Kizaru's pay for an entire year. When Kizaru heard that his salary was being cut, he made a pained expression, insisting that the entire mission had been sabotaged by Wood's interference. However, his attempt to deflect blame failed, as when more Marine reinforcements arrived on the island, Wood was safely escorted away by an official ship. The reason for this was simple: Wood had protected Saint Oswald's family from the vicious pirates. This was confirmed by Rosred's daughter, Saint Lulietta. Besides, Wood was untouchable at that point. His position in the world, his connections, the interests he represented. Nobody could afford to lay a hand on him. Now, with the Celestial Dragons providing testimony in his favor, Wood and his crew left Sabati without any further trouble. Kizaru ended up shouldering all the blame, not only for failing to capture the Straw Hats but also for attacking Mr. Wood, causing significant emotional distress to him. Wood complained that the incident had affected his mental health, which would in turn slow down weapon production, leading to reduced allowances for the Celestial Dragons. The Celestial Dragons were not happy. With their funding cut, they couldn't take out their anger on their benefactor, Wood, so they took it out on the Marines. Poor Kizaru never imagined that what started as an easy assignment would almost cost him his position as admiral. If it hadn't been for Fleet Admiral Sengoku stepping in to defend him, arguing that the removal of an admiral would destabilize the seas, Kizaru would have likely been demoted. After receiving a stern lecture from the five elders, Sengoku gave Kizaru a similar earful when they returned to Marineford. But Kizaru had one distinct quality: a thick skin. He understood that if Sengoku was berating him, it meant his job was safe. As long as he kept his well-paid, easygoing position, he didn't mind getting scolded. Seeing Kizaru's shameless attitude, Sengoku pulled out his last trump card. He docked Kizaru's salary for the year. At that moment, Kizaru's carefree facade cracked. Despite his protests that he'd rather accept a demotion than a pay cut, Sengoku stood firm. He knew that nothing frightened Kizaru more than losing his salary. After dealing with Kizaru, Sengoku remembered another officer he'd frequently docked pay from. He quickly locked his office door and pulled out a den mushi, a transponder snail. It wasn't that Sengoku wanted to secretly watch something inappropriate. He just wanted to contact someone. The secrecy was necessary because the individual he intended to call now held a vastly different status than before. To be frank, in terms of influence and connections across the seas, Sengoku felt that even his position as Fleet Admiral couldn't match this person. At the very least, Sengoku couldn't get the normally arrogant Celestial Dragons to obediently listen to him. Years had passed, and Sengoku had never imagined that the young man from back then would rise to such a level. What was initially just a whim had now become one of the Marines' biggest secrets. Buru buru buru. The den mushi rang rhythmically, and soon the other end was picked up, and a man's voice came through. Chapter 394, Will Wood participate in the Summit War? Old man Sengoku, if you're trying to send me on another secret mission, then forget about it. Wood's voice came through the receiver, clearly displeased, causing Sengoku to feel a twinge of awkwardness. No matter the promise of promotion or a raise, I'm not interested anymore. Cut my pay if you want, it's not like I need the money right now. Wood's frustration was understandable. Sengoku had, over the years, assigned Wood nothing but grueling tasks. First, he had to infiltrate Impel Down and pretend to defect. Then, he sabotaged the deal between the Don Quixote family and the world government involving the Operation Fruit model, modification human. Later, he was involved in the Pluton Blueprints incident at NI's lobby and more recently, in creating conflicts between Big Mom and Kaido. None of these missions had been easy. The figures involved and the stakes were always sky high, pushing the limits of what could be accomplished. Yet, Wood had succeeded in every assignment, and not only that, but he also managed to extricate the Marines from these affairs unscathed. That was precisely why Sengoku had continually placed trust in him. However, Sengoku knew that Wood wasn't the same as before. He couldn't be fooled so easily now. Back when he was a fresh pirate, promises of promotion and pay raises might motivate him. But as the missions stretched on, and Wood realized he might never truly leave his undercover role, those incentives became meaningless. In the end, Sengoku had been forced to promise that once Wood completed his duties, he could retire. To live peacefully as a branch captain in a far-off location. But years had passed, and Sengoku had yet to fulfill that promise, causing Wood to grow even more disillusioned. The last time, Sengoku had nearly run out of options to convince him. Wood only accepted the mission to attend Big Mom's tea party because he feared for his sister, Ain, and the dangers she might face. Sengoku knew he could only use Ain as leverage sparingly, or Wood might finally snap. Despite all this, Sengoku, Garp, and the other top Marines still believed they hadn't been wrong about Wood all those years ago. They felt that the sense of justice was still there, but it was a different kind of justice. One Wood executed on his own terms. As long as the Marines weren't Wood's enemy, he'd continue his work, especially given his ties to people like Jian, Ain, and Zephyr. I'm not calling about a secret mission, Sengoku said, choosing his words carefully. I just want to know why you were at Sabati Archipelago and why you ended up fighting Kizaru. Though Sengoku's question sounded casual, the answer meant a lot to him. He needed to know if Wood still held the same attitude toward the Marines that he did all those years ago. After all, Wood's current identity as an ancient weapon and a major underground figure wielded far more clout than his nominal Marine rank. "I just happened to be passing by Sabity," Wood replied, his tone nonchalant. "I'd heard about the Marine Science Unit's Pacifista, this so-called formidable human weapon. As someone in the arms business, I wanted to get my hands on one to see if Vegapunk is as brilliant as they say. As for Kizaru, I didn't provoke him. He came at me first. Probably couldn't stand how handsome I am. That wrinkled old creep just couldn't bear the competition." Sengoku could feel the vein bulging on his forehead as he listened to Wood's carefree, shameless explanation. Of course Kizaru, being the head of the science unit, couldn't just ignore someone trying to waltz off with one of their latest projects. Yet, despite being irritated, Sengoku found relief in Wood's response. There was no sign of betrayal in his words. "The execution date for Fire Fist Ace has been decided," Sengoku said, shifting the topic. "It will take place at Marine Headquarters, Maniford. I need you to find a way to be there." The Marines had discovered that Portgas the Ace was actually the son of Guldy Roger, the Pirate King, and planned to use his public execution as a declaration of their strength. However, Ace wasn't just a notorious pirate, he was also the 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates. Given Whitebeard's nature, there was no chance he'd let one of his sons face execution without a fight. The Whitebeard Pirates were considered the strongest of the 4 emperors, and Whitebeard himself was often called the strongest man in the world. Although the Marines had prepared extensively for the upcoming conflict, Sengoku had his doubts. Could they really handle the full might of the Whitebeard Pirates? After all, the 7 warlords were still pirates at heart, and Sengoku knew Garp, who had practically raised Ace, would almost certainly make some sort of move. 3 admirals might be enough to bring down Whitebeard himself, but then there were the division commanders, each a formidable force. This was why Sengoku wanted as much extra strength as possible, and Wood was the ideal choice. Not only was he cunning and resourceful, but his strength also ranked among the best in the world. "You want me, a pirate, to attend the Summit War?" Wood asked, his voice a mix of surprise and disbelief. "Are you planning for me to publicly reveal that I'm an undercover Marine?" Even if Sengoku wanted him to reveal his identity, Wood wasn't interested. His current position gave him unparalleled influence, something that would be impossible to maintain if he rejoined the Marines, even at the rank of Vice Admiral. Besides, unless he personally admitted to being a Marine, no one would believe it. The things Wood had done over the years, the alliances he had built, made it impossible for anyone to think he was anything other than a pirate. The Marines were dogs of the world government and the Celestial Dragons, but Wood had his hands on their throats, using wealth and power to keep them in check. "No, I don't want your true identity exposed," Sengoku replied, quickly dispelling the notion. "Your current role benefits the Marines much more. I do want you at Maniford, but I want you there as a pirate." Sengoku wasn't a fool. The Marines had painstakingly nurtured a figure who, after a mere few years, had become one of the most influential in the world. Bringing Wood back into the fold as an official Marine would add little value. However, keeping him in his current role gave the Marines a valuable source of intelligence and the ability to complete high-risk missions without raising suspicion. "So, you're saying you want me to fight against the Marines at Maniford? To make things even harder for you?" "Wood, our preparations for the Whitebeard Pirates are flawless. This time, Whitebeard will not leave Maniford alive," Sengoku said, his tone confident. "And you? You've been building your influence for years. Don't you want to take the next step? Don't you want to become one of the 4 emperors?" Hearing Sengoku's words, Wood understood. The fleet admiral was planning a massive move, not just to eliminate Whitebeard but also to elevate Wood, their inside man, to the position of an emperor of the sea. The title of an emperor represented not only power but also significant influence across the seas. Having a member of the 4 emperors secretly aligned with the Marines would give them unmatched leverage over the sea's pirate population. "I refuse," Wood said immediately. "Becoming an emperor just means painting a target on my back. Even if Whitebeard falls, others will tear each other apart to fill that gap. I'm not interested. But I might still drop by Maniford to see the spectacle, though I won't bring a large force. Nico Robin won't join in. She has no love for the Marines. And the fishmen won't be involved either. Queen Atoheim has worked too hard to improve relations between our races to throw it all away. So, it might just be me and a few of my guys." Sengoku, hearing this, did not press further. As long as Wood showed up, that would be enough. His goal was to have a contingency plan, something in his back pocket for unexpected situations. "I'll leave a gap in the gates of justice for you," Sengoku said. "With your skills, getting here shouldn't be too hard." With business settled, both hung up. Sengoku locked the Dendenmushi back in a secret compartment, while Wood simply slipped it into his coat. After a moment of thought, Wood turned to Robin and Ruth, informing them of his plan to enter seclusion for training once again. He had received 2 chances for universal simulations as a reward for his fight against Big Mom and Kaido. One had been used to visit the ReZero universe. Now, with only one opportunity left, Wood decided to use it before the Summit War. The Summit War would be the pinnacle battle in the world of One Piece. The strongest man in the world versus the 3 admirals of the Navy, Whitebeard's pirate fleet against the entirety of Maniford. Practically every notable figure in the sea would be there, clashing in an epic confrontation. Wood had confidence in his strength, but he wasn't arrogant enough to believe he could dominate a battlefield of that caliber. If the simulation could offer him an edge, no matter how small, he would take it. Both Robin and Ruth were used to their captain's habit of frequently retreating into his room for secluded training. Though his strength was already overwhelming, he always insisted he needed more. That his enemies were even stronger. And each time, after a few days or weeks, he would emerge stronger than before. Other strong individuals might reach a plateau in their growth, but not their captain. For him, growing stronger was as natural as breathing. They had been with Wood long enough to know that whatever he did during those sessions made him stronger, but they never inquired. It was his secret. As loyal members of his crew, their role was not to pry, but to protect him while he trained. Whenever Wood locked himself in his room, Robin and Ruth would keep a vigilant watch in their own ways. Ruth, who typically enjoyed lounging around, would suddenly find himself patrolling near Wood's room, claiming it was just a stroll. As for Robin, she might not always be visible, but her flower fruit model, replicate human devil fruit ensured that her eyes and ears were always present, keeping guard over the captain's sanctuary. Chapter 395, Simulation Start, Akam ga Kill. Do you wish to consume the chance to use the multiverse simulation? Yes. Ding. The multiverse life simulation is about to begin. This dimension will enter a state of slowed time, and the host will experience a dimensional transfer in 5 seconds. Please prepare accordingly. World selected, Akam ga Kill, Dimension Transfer Countdown, 5, 4, 3, 1. Multiverse life simulation begins. As Wood listened to the familiar notification chime in his ear, he experienced a brief sensation of drowsiness. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in a new world, with a completely new identity. Hey, rookie. What are you dazing off for? General Najunda is calling for you. With your half-assed attitude, you'd be dead in an instant on the battlefield. This simulation felt different from the previous ones. This time, Wood was not alone but found himself in a military camp, surrounded by soldiers wearing armor similar to his. Before Wood could fully absorb the information and memories flowing through his mind, a fellow soldier gave him a shove, pushing him forward. First time on the battlefield, huh? Don't worry. The first time you see such cruelty and bloodshed, it's normal to feel disgusted or angry, even for a veteran like me. Though these borderland rebels are enemies of the Empire, General Eseth's actions are extreme. The voice trailed off, and then. Anyway, enough talking. Hand me your map. We need to plan our advance route and regroup with General Eseth, so we can defeat the rebels more effectively. The person speaking to Wood was a strikingly beautiful woman with lavender-colored hair. Her beauty belied a toughness and competence in her demeanor. When Wood heard her instructions, he belatedly realized he was holding a scroll of paper. A military map. Which he quickly handed over. Taking the map, the woman inspected it carefully without further comment. As for Wood, still somewhat dazed, he stepped back and began to absorb the memories that were flooding his mind. Just as he began processing his new memories, a boy with green hair, who wore a uniform similar to Wood, grinned mischievously and wrapped an arm around Wood's neck. Well, rookie? Najunda is beautiful, right? I figured you'd be fearless, but when it comes to her, you were like a deer caught in the headlights. Clever move, though, acting that way to get her attention. The green-haired boy sighed dramatically. Damn it. Why didn't I think of that earlier? Anyway, we agreed that Najunda wasn't your type, right? You're just here because you were bored of your comfy lifestyle. As the green-haired boy spoke, Wood's memories started clicking into place. He finally remembered who this young man was. In this new world, Wood was still known as Wood. However, instead of a mere foot soldier, he hailed from a wealthy merchant family. The family heir, to be exact. Wood had always been fascinated by martial arts. With his natural talent, he grew up without a single rival among his peers. That was what eventually drove him to come to the battlefield. He wanted to meet opponents stronger than himself. Worthy opponents. In order to pursue this dream, he even abandoned a comfortable lifestyle and the chance to inherit his family business. As for the green-haired boy next to him, he was named Lubbock, and he was not only Wood's comrade but also a close childhood friend. Lubbock was also from a wealthy family of merchants, which explained how he and Wood ended up growing up together. However, unlike Wood, who was the heir, Lubbock was the fourth son of his family. While Lubbock didn't have a direct claim to his family's fortune, his family's vast wealth guaranteed him a life of luxury. But instead of taking the easy route, Lubbock chose to enlist as a soldier, serving in a highly dangerous battlefront in the southwest region. While Wood came seeking strong adversaries, Lubbock had only one motivation: the beautiful general in front of them, Najenda. Before coming to the southwest front, Najenda had been stationed in the region where Wood and Lubbock grew up, and Lubbock was instantly smitten by her beauty. To follow Najenda, Lubbock abandoned his comfortable lifestyle and enlisted. He even worked his way up to become part of Najenda's personal guard. As for Wood, joining the military had never been part of his plan. It was all because of Lubbock's persuasive words that he eventually ended up enlisting alongside him. Lubbock's feelings for Najenda were his biggest secret, which he managed to hide from everyone, except for Wood, his childhood friend. And since the secret was out, Lubbock decided that dragging Wood into his plans wouldn't hurt. He convinced him by highlighting the thrill of fighting powerful adversaries and dangerous beasts. Which, of course, intrigued Wood. Like I would use some cheap trick to impress her. I was just distracted and didn't respond right away. Anyway, if you care about her so much, why don't you take some initiative, Lubbock? As Lubbock leaned in, worried about his friend, Wood pushed his head away dismissively. No doubt, Najenda was beautiful, with striking looks and a spirited aura. However, Wood had seen his fair share of beauties and wasn't interested in Najenda. Lubbock was a classic Onsan, older sister, fan. They were only around 13 or 14 years old, while Najenda was at least in her 20s. For Najenda, they were nothing more than boys. You wouldn't understand. True love doesn't always mean possession. Sometimes, love means protecting the one you cherish, even from afar. Hearing such classic semplines made Wood sigh internally. Lubbock was clearly too timid, but wanted to act like some noble guardian. Well, even if you are an angel, you'd be the green-haired angel of forgiveness. With that color of yours, I can tell you're headed for heartbreak. Najenda was pragmatic and completely dedicated to the Empire's future. Wood could tell she wasn't the type to fall in love easily. It meant that Lubbock's love would inevitably go unfulfilled. Moreover, he couldn't even express it, as doing so would likely ruin everything given Najenda's character. Anyway, as long as you uphold our agreement not to go after my goddess, we're good. Her wish is for peace and prosperity for the Empire. If I can help her fulfill that dream, maybe. Just maybe. I'll have a chance someday. Though Wood hadn't mentioned it, Lubbock understood there was no chance for him right now. Najenda's heart was with the Empire. Only when the Empire was liberated would she be free of that burden, and perhaps then, Lubbock might have a slim chance. He also knew it depended on his friend. Wood. Not becoming his rival in love. Lubbock was proud and good at hiding his talents, but the next to Wood, he could not help feeling inferior. They were both from wealthy families, but while Lubbock was the fourth son, Wood was the heir. Set to inherit his family's business. Lubbock was strong and was even the user of the Imperial Arm. Crosstail. But Wood also wielded an Imperial Arm and was far stronger. Before becoming an Imperial Arm user, Wood was already regarded as the best fighter in their town. Even hired guards from his family couldn't defeat the young Wood. In terms of appearance, while Wood wasn't necessarily astonishingly handsome, among their peers, few could compare to his looks. With money, looks, and strength, Wood was the constant object of admiration for the local noble girls. And because of this, Lubbock had always been wary of Wood becoming his rival, potentially stealing Najenda from him. You have nothing to worry about. I'm only interested in strong fighters. Besides, I'm just a young boy, not chasing after older women. I'll leave that to you, the Onsan fanatic. If anything, between Najenda and Esdeath, I'd rather go with Esdeath. Wood referred to Esdeath, another general of the Empire, a beautiful, tall woman with long blue hair that reached her knees. Not that Wood knew her personally. He had only seen her in a recent battle. She was also an Imperial Arm user and one of the strongest, capable of manipulating ice. Similar to the Admiral Aokiji Wood knew from another world. You're interested in that demon of a woman? It's probably just because she's powerful, right? Hearing the name Esdeath made Lubbock shudder. He might have liked older women, but Esdeath was a different story entirely. There was no denying that both Najenda and Esdeath were beautiful, but after witnessing Esdeath's brutal treatment of the rebels alongside her three beasts, Lubbock couldn't feel any attraction towards her. No, I'm not saying I like her. I just think her strength is impressive. She'd make a good opponent. Lubbock gave Wood a knowing look. He understood his friend well. Wood was the type of person who lived for the thrill of combat, a true battle maniac. He could not focus on anything other than his pursuit of powerful foes. If Wood was interested in women, with his wealth and advantages, what woman wouldn't fall for him? While Wood and Lubbock were chatting, Najenda had finally decided on the route of advance and began preparing the soldiers for departure. Wood and Lubbock, being part of her guard, were naturally tasked with staying by her side. Najunda led her imperial troops, numbering in the thousands, through a roundabout path over several days. They intended to attack the rear of the rebel forces and trap them in a pincer alongside Asdith. But as they reached the heights overlooking the valley, something felt wrong. This was the rear of the rebels' main base. Even if not heavily defended, there should still be some garrison. But as they advanced, they didn't encounter any resistance at all. The rebels might have been uncivilized and poor, but they certainly weren't foolish. Leaving their main rear entirely undefended was simply unthinkable. There's a strong smell of blood in the air, and the humidity is higher than usual. Looks like the battle's already begun, said Wood. Najunda knew that Wood was also an Imperial alarm user and that his senses were exceptionally sharp, so hearing his observation, she became visibly worried. She quickly ordered the troops to move forward at full speed. She felt a deep sense of guilt. To ensure her soldiers' safety, she had taken a longer, safer route, which ultimately delayed their arrival. Timing was everything on the battlefield, and failing to attack as planned could result in Asdith being overwhelmed by the enemy's increased pressure. But when Najunda and her troops rushed into the rebel encampment, the sight before her was entirely different from what she had expected. Just as Wood had said, the battle had indeed already begun. But instead of Asdith being overwhelmed, it was the rebels who had been utterly crushed. The rebels had not overwhelmed Asdith. Rather, despite being outnumbered, Asdith had completely decimated the rebel forces. Najunda and her soldiers arrived just in time to see Asdith lounging arrogantly on the throne of the rebel king. Her slender sword was thrust into the ground beside her. The supposedly proud and fierce rebel prince was now groveling at her feet, licking her boots like a dog. Asdith exuded an air of complete dominance. She was a true queen. Najunda, you're late. But never mind, these pitiful rebels are hardly worth the effort. I could have handled them alone. I suppose I'll let you take credit for some of this victory, but all the spoils of war belong to my troops. No objections, right? Seeing Najunda approach, Asdith kicked the rebel prince aside and spoke to her dismissively. Since your forces defeated the rebels, I have no interest in claiming credit or spoils. Najunda responded. However, more important than that, what do you plan to do with these defeated rebels? Chapter 396, Let me show you what true power looks like. The border tribes had always been at odds with the Empire. Typically, even when the Empire triumphed, it never bothered much with the defeated border tribes. However, Asdith and her subordinates, the Three Beasts, employed brutal methods on the battlefield that Najunda could hardly ignore. Even though these border tribes were their enemies, Asdith's tactics struck Najunda as excessively inhumane. It was clear that Asdith hadn't realized Najunda found her methods too extreme. Asdith assumed Najunda was simply concerned about how the defeated tribes would be dealt with. Therefore, she led Najunda, Wood, and the others to a particular location. This is the Colosseum built by the tribal king. It seems to be where they select their warriors each year. Asdith explained. I really like this place, so I thought we'd have a little game here. As she spoke, Asdith gestured for her subordinates to begin. At Asdith's signal, one of her three beasts, a young, blonde boy with an innocent face, gleefully jumped into the arena. Moments later, the gate on the opposite side of the Colosseum opened, and to Najunda and her team's confusion, a large group of border tribespeople were ushered in. Most of these tribespeople were women and children. There were hundreds of them, crammed into the arena. Only a few hundred had been let in, not because the tribe lacked women and children, but because the Colosseum could only hold so many at once. These displaced people, women who had lost their husbands and children who had lost their fathers, realized what lay ahead. Cries of despair echoed throughout the arena, some people trembling uncontrollably. But their pleas fell on deaf ears. One of the three beasts, a fake maiden named Nai-Ah, had no sympathy for them. He began playing his flute-like imperial arm, the March of the Dead. The March of the Dead, a flute-type imperial arm, was known for its ability to control emotions, often used on the battlefield to boost morale. However, it could also manipulate various feelings or even control those lacking a strong will. The fear and anxiety of the tribespeople made them easy prey for the flute. Soon, mothers who had been holding their children close were suddenly biting at their throats with crazed expressions. Mothers who had been quietly weeping were now throwing infants to the ground with twisted fury. A horrifying scene of parents attacking their own children and siblings fighting each other played out before everyone, with Asdith watching impassively. Nai-Ah, on the other hand, seemed to be enjoying himself immensely. He walked over to the bodies of some dead tribal girls and peeled their faces off. They were her collection, after all. Najunda could barely hold back her shaking, trying to suppress her nausea. She wanted to say something, anything, but couldn't find the strength. She was, after all, an imperial general. The border tribes were enemies of the empire, so there was no real reason for her to speak up for them. Besides, this tribe had been conquered by Asdith's troops, and technically these people were Asdith's captives. It was up to her to decide their fate. But even knowing all this, Najunda found it difficult to accept. These tribespeople were still human, even if they were enemies. As the vanquished, they at least deserved to die with some dignity. Humans weren't danger beasts, but Asdith and her 3 beasts made Najunda realize just how cruel and dark the Empire could be. Najunda wanted to help these poor women and children, but there was nothing she could do. Helping them would mean defying the Empire. And Asdith herself. Najunda could barely keep herself in check, but Wood had no such reservations. Without a second's hesitation, he leaped down into the arena, placing himself directly in front of Nia. Seeing Wood's sudden move, Najunda and Lubbock were stunned. Lubbock even started yelling at Wood, trying to stop him from doing anything rash. It was obvious to anyone that Asdith wasn't someone you should mess with. And they were all still part of the Imperial military. Disobeying orders would lead to severe consequences. "Hey, you there?" Wood said as he stepped towards Nia. "Does it make you feel good to pick on the weak? This is a coliseum, right? Shouldn't you be fighting a real opponent instead? How about, instead of tormenting these helpless women and children, you have a little fun with me instead?" Seeing Wood jump into the arena and confront Nia, the other 2 members of the 3 beasts, Liver and Didara, were about to follow. But Asdith held them back with a gesture. "Interesting," Asdith said, her tone amused. "Najunda, is this your idea, or is this kid acting on his own?" Dressed in her pristine white military uniform, Asdith rose from her seat, her eyes locked on Wood, her expression one of interest. A one-sided massacre could indeed get boring. Adding a bit of entertainment would make things much more enjoyable for her. "He's my bodyguard, so naturally, this is my idea," Najunda replied. "Asdith, don't you think your methods are a bit too cruel? Even if these people are border tribes, even if there are enemies, they're still unarmed women and children. Is there really a need to execute them in such a brutal manner?" Najunda was a general of the Empire, and she understood that compassion had no place in war. She didn't expect these women and children to survive, but at the very least, as fellow human beings, she hoped they could die swiftly and with some dignity. "No, no, no," Wood interrupted. "I'm doing this of my own accord. It has nothing to do with General Najunda. I'm not acting out of some bleeding heart desire to save these tribespeople. I just can't stand someone pretending they're strong because they're bullying the weak." At Wood's words, Nia's innocent face twisted with fury. The 3 beasts were Asdith's right-hand warriors. In terms of strength, they ranked among the Empire's best, just below a few of the top generals. If Asdith called them weak, they'd accept it without question. But to have some mere bodyguard call them weak? That they couldn't tolerate. They were the 3 beasts. They weren't someone a random grunt could insult. "The 3 beasts, huh? I don't really see what's so impressive about you," Wood taunted. "True strength isn't just about power. It's about what's inside. From the moment you felt joy in hurting these weak people, you became nothing more than a weakling in my eyes. So, what do you say? Want to spar a little and see what true strength looks like?" Najunda claimed that Wood was acting on her orders only to try and save his life. She outranked the 3 beasts. After all, if Wood's actions were seen as following orders, the worst-case scenario would be internal conflict, which might end with a demotion or dismissal. But Wood was different. He was just a bodyguard. A glorified soldier. Challenging the 3 beasts without permission wasn't just a matter of internal conflict, it was insubordination. In the military, such behavior was punishable by death. "I've heard for years about how Asdith's 3 beasts were among the Empire's strongest," Wood continued. "I love fighting. I've always enjoyed a good match. I've always craved an opponent who can give me an exciting fight, but I've never really found one. When I joined the Empire, I thought I'd have my chance, but the fierce border tribes turned out to be disappointingly weak. By the time I arrived, they'd already been taken down by Asdith and the 3 beasts. Since there are no more warriors among the tribes, Asdith, how about you satisfy my desire for a real fight by letting one of your 3 beasts face me?" Despite Wood's taunts and Nia's seething rage, the 3 beasts were fiercely loyal to Asdith. Until she gave the order, Nia held himself back. "What's your name, kid?" Asdith called from above, her lips curving into a smile. "Asdith, you can just call me Wood," he replied. "I'm from some little, unremarkable place." The Colosseum was designed in a concave fashion. Wood and Nia stood below while Asdith watched from above. Wood wanted to say that his position allowed him to see things he shouldn't, but he held his tongue. He had a feeling the ice-cold queen might decide to join him in the arena if he spoke up. So instead, he kept his mouth shut and looked up at Asdith. He wasn't staring because he was a pervert. No, it was a matter of respect. Asdith was his superior, after all. He wasn't sure what anyone else thought, but he believed his own reasoning. Wood, is it? Interesting. Asdeath mused. If you want to call this a sparring match, that sounds boring. Why don't we add a little wager to make it more fun? I can overlook your interference today, but if you lose to Nia, what then? As Asdeath spoke, the playful smile she had been wearing vanished, replaced by an icy, stern expression. If I lose, just execute me like any other spy. Wood answered with a casual grin. I'm fighting because I crave it. For me, the defeated must die. That's my answer. That's my choice. Seeing Wood's unbothered smile, Asdeath was visibly taken aback, as though something in her heart had been stirred. But she quickly suppressed whatever that feeling was, her face returning to its usual composed expression. There's no need to execute you, she said. You've piqued my interest. If you lose, you'll come work for me instead. Najenda, do you have any objections to that? And if you win, I'll let you decide what happens to these tribal women and children. If you want to release them, it's up to you. The deal struck. Najenda and Lubbock both heaved sighs of relief. They had been certain that Wood's reckless actions had sealed his fate. But now it seemed Asdeath had another side to her. The current situation was probably the best they could hope for. Wood had cleverly redefined his defiance as a mere sparring match, and Asdeath had accepted. If Wood won, the women and children of the tribe would be spared. If he lost, he wouldn't be executed, he'd just switch commanders. There was no reason for Najenda to refuse such an offer, and she quickly agreed to Asdeath's terms. You got lucky, kid. Nia sneered. Asdeath seems to have taken an interest in you, so it looks like I can't kill you outright. But that doesn't mean I can't make you pay for what you said. Prepare yourself. With Asdeath's approval, Nia no longer held back. Despite his youthful, girlish face, he twisted it into a deranged, sadistic grin as he pulled out a bone flute and began to play. Nia's imperial arm, the March of the Dead, could control emotions through music, especially those with weaker wills or those knowledgeable in music. Wood had grown up among nobles and had received a refined education, which meant he was particularly susceptible to the effects of music. Nia's flute played a complex, erratic tune, flooding Wood's mind with a barrage of conflicting emotions. Watching Wood's face contort in response, Nia looked on in triumph. He approached him with a knife in hand, intending to finish the fight with a quick stab to the kidney while Wood was still under his control. All that boasting, and you crumble so easily. How boring. Chapter 397, Powerful even without an imperial arm. Nia gripped his short dagger, glaring at Wood with disdain. Initially, Nia thought Wood would put up some sort of struggle, but it turned out he was all bark and no bite. Under normal circumstances, Nia would have killed Wood without hesitation. However, considering that General Asdeath seemed to take a liking to this pretty boy, he decided to stab Wood in the kidney. A wound that wouldn't be fatal. Not a bad performance. It almost made me lose myself in the music. It's been a while since I last heard such a tune. It seems like you're not just an ordinary civilian. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to produce music of such quality. But even with a performance fueled by your imperial arm, it's not nearly enough to manipulate my mind. Nia's dagger, which had been aimed at Wood's kidney, was halted in midair. His wrist was firmly gripped by another hand, like an iron shackle, rendering him unable to move. Compared to Nia, whose forehead veins bulged as he put all his strength into trying to free his wrist, Wood looked entirely relaxed. Impossible. I clearly saw you fall under the influence of my March of the Dead, whale. How are you still conscious? Just as Wood could see that Nia had some musical talent, Nia, as the performer, could tell that Wood had a certain level of appreciation for music. Such individuals were naturally more susceptible to his imperial arm's influence. Yet Nia couldn't comprehend how Wood had managed to break free so quickly. Wondering why I broke free from your imperial arm's effect so fast? You're not wrong. Your imperial arm is powerful. I was indeed influenced at first. But once someone trains to a certain level, even if they lose consciousness, their body instinctively reacts to danger. For a true swordsman, the cultivation of mental strength is essential. So, frankly, your imperial arm holds no real power over me. As Wood finished speaking, he threw Nia violently against the wall of the arena, causing Nia's body to crash hard into the surrounding walls. I heard a rumor once in the Empire. There are 48 imperial arms, and each one is unique. If imperial arm users fight, one must die. Coincidentally, I'm also an imperial arm user. But since this is just a sparring match, if I end up killing you because of that rule, it'd be quite the headache for me. So this time, I won't use my imperial arm. Yes, Wood was also an imperial arm user. His imperial arm was the type that took the form of a weapon. A seemingly ordinary sword when its abilities weren't active. After throwing Nia aside, Wood casually unhooked the sword from his belt and clenched his fists. The term imperial arm referred to the 48 powerful weapons forged over 1,000 years ago by the first emperor, who used the empire's vast wealth and influence to summon the greatest craftsmen in the world. They used legendary materials from super dangerous creatures, rare metals like Horich alchem, and secret techniques that have since been lost to time to create these 48 unique and powerful weapons, known as imperial arms. Each imperial arm had a distinct and formidable ability. The individuals who wielded them were called imperial arm users. But not everyone could wield an imperial arm. It required a certain compatibility. An imperial arm would choose its own master. If a person's character was incompatible with the imperial arm, they would be unable to use its power effectively, or it might even harm them. The imperial arms were made to match the traits, abilities, and mindset of their users. This was why imperial arm users were considered a cut above ordinary people. Though 48 imperial arms were originally crafted over a millennium ago, many have been lost to history. Here, however, as Death, her three beasts, Najenda, Lubbock, and Wood were all imperial arm users. An imperial arm user's strength largely depended on their imperial arm. The fact that Wood was one but chose not to use his weapon wasn't just arrogance. It was something else entirely. "Don't underestimate me, you bastard." Suddenly, the section of the arena wall where Nia had crashed exploded in a cloud of dust. His body, now several times its original size, propelled itself off the wall, causing spiderweb-like cracks to form in the stone as he shot towards Wood. Previously, Nia stood at barely 5 feet tall, a slender figure who preferred short shorts and a jacket, earning him the nickname Trap from Wood. But now, Nia looked like he had been injected with growth hormones. His formerly small frame had swelled to over 6.5 feet, with bulging muscles like slabs of solid rock. Before, Nia looked like a young, feminine boy. Now he was more akin to a bulky brute. Boom. Using the walls of the arena to launch himself, Nia descended at high speed, smashing into the ground with a force that shattered a vast area, leaving a crater nearly 15 feet across where Wood had just stood. Don't think my imperial arm only affects others. The power of March of the Dead, Whale can be used on myself as well. In my current demon summon form, even if I faced a high-level danger beast, I could tear it apart with my bare hands. You got lucky just now. Otherwise, I would have shattered every bone in your body with a single punch. Nia looked at the empty pit in front of him and then glanced over at Wood, who had already moved to another area. His expression showed his displeasure. With the special technique demon summon strengthening his body, Nia was overflowing with confidence. Sure, Wood had thrown him earlier with considerable force, but now, in his enhanced form, Nia believed he would be more than a match for him. Imperial arm users who had mastered their weapons could utilize their special techniques. Some of these techniques had severe side effects, even causing death upon use. However, other techniques had more manageable side effects. Nia's demon summon was one of the latter. Whether the technique was lethal or not, mastering an imperial arm's secret abilities was no easy task. It required an extremely high level of compatibility, as well as complete mastery of the weapon. Throughout history, less than a third of imperial arm users had managed to master their secret techniques, giving Nia ample reason to be proud. With his eyes locked on Wood, Nia stomped down hard, cracking the ground beneath him before charging forward at high speed. Wood could tell that, despite Nia's earlier demeanor as a music lover, his combat skills were nothing to scoff at. It wasn't surprising, considering Nia was one of Esdeath's three beasts, and they had followed her into countless battles. If Nia were only skilled at playing music, he wouldn't have lasted this long. Wood is being reckless. As an imperial arm user, how does he expect to fight without his imperial arm? Even though it's said that a battle between imperial arm users must end in death, that only applies if there is intent to kill. Najenda knew a bit about Wood. He and Lubbock were both newcomers to the army, and both were rare imperial arm users. The tasks they had completed earned them their promotions to her personal guard. That big guy thinks just because he got bigger, he's already won. He's about to have a rude awakening. Most imperial arm users rely heavily on their weapons for strength. But some monsters are so strong that even without an imperial arm, they can crush 99% of their opponents. Unlike Najenda, Lubbock watched Nia charge at Wood with a relaxed expression. Having grown up together, Lubbock knew Wood better than almost anyone. His own imperial arm, the crosstail, came into his possession before Wood even got his. They had sparred many times when Wood didn't have an imperial arm. But every time, Wood had defeated Lubbock soundly. Wood was the kind of freakishly strong person Lubbock had described. He didn't need an imperial arm to dominate. As Lubbock predicted, the fight in the arena was soon going as he had expected. Contrary to what others believed would happen. In the arena, Nia's bulging arms were frozen mid-punch. His fist had indeed made contact with wood, but the outcome was far from what Nia had imagined. Nia's massive fist, now almost the size of a boulder, had clashed with another fist in midair. Despite the vast difference in size, when the fists collided, they created a scene of perfect balance. The ground beneath both fighters cracked and split under the force of the collision, and a powerful gust of wind swept across the arena. How? How is this possible? I'm in my demon summon state, powered by my imperial arm. But you haven't even used yours. Nia looked in disbelief at his fist, which had been stopped dead by Wood's own punch. There's nothing impossible about it. Your body may be enhanced by your imperial arm, but mine was built through relentless, day and night training. An imperial arm can strengthen its user, but in the end, it's still external aid. There's no rule that says ordinary people can't defeat imperial arm users, right? It's quite simple. Though your body is strong due to your imperial arm, mine is stronger because of my own effort. As Wood finished speaking, the veins in his arm became visibly pronounced. The seemingly equal clash between their fists began to shift in Wood's favor. Despite Nia's fist being several times larger, it was gradually being forced back. With a sudden burst of strength from Wood, Nia's enormous body was launched backward. Nia's body, carried by the immense force, dragged along the arena floor, leaving a deep trench. Before he even realized what had happened, Wood had already caught up with him mid-flight and appeared above him. Seeing Wood above him, Nia instinctively sensed danger. He wanted to defend himself, but the force of the wind pinned him down, making it impossible to move. Watching Wood clasp his hands together and prepare to strike down, Nia could do nothing but cross his arms in front of his face, trying to protect his head. Boom! The ground shook violently as an explosion resounded throughout the arena, filling the air with dust. From where Asdith stood, she could even feel the arena tremble slightly. A moment later, a figure slowly emerged from the settling dust, carrying an unconscious Nia, now reverted to his smaller form, over his shoulder, and tossed him to the ground. Unsurprisingly, it was Wood who emerged, standing unharmed except for his dusty clothes. Meanwhile, Nia lay unconscious on the ground. A stark contrast that made the outcome of the fight clear, even without a referee. Seeing Nia defeated, Liver and Daidara, the other members of the Three Beasts, looked furious. They seemed ready to jump into the arena, determined to show Wood that the Three Beasts weren't to be trifled with. Nia's loss was only because his imperial arm was ineffective against Wood. If it were either of their imperial arms, they were confident they could at least hold their own. Enough. A loss is a loss. Do you think I'm the type to go back on my word? You said your name is Wood, correct? I'll remember it. My name is Asdith. As promised, the fate of these tribal women and children is now yours to decide. And even though you've won today, remember, I'll take you away from Najenda one day. Chapter 398, Betrayal of the Empire. Confronted by Asdith, seeing the anger on and faces, immediately dismissed them and had, who was unconscious, carried away, admitting defeat rather straightforwardly. Asdith saw clearly why Nia had lost. It wasn't just that his had no effect on Wood himself was an extremely capable fighter. Of the Three Beasts, Liver might be stronger than Nia, but if he fought Wood, Asdith doubted his chances of victory. After all, Wood was also an imperial arm user, and he defeated Nia without even using his imperial arm. Asdith couldn't be sure just how strong Wood might be if he used his weapon, but she was certain it would be far beyond what he had already displayed. Besides, Asdith wasn't someone who couldn't accept defeat. She had made a bet, and if she had lost, resorting to sending people in turns to fight would have been truly disgraceful. I never thought you'd actually manage to defeat one of Asdith's. You've impressed me. Spoke to Wood, though her tone shifted to a stern warning. But don't act so recklessly next time. You were lucky this time. Asdith was in a good mood, and she seems to have taken an interest in you. Otherwise, you'd likely be dead by now. Don't doubt me, Asdith isn't as kind or as approachable as you might think. Her power far surpasses that of the Three Beasts. Without sufficient strength, do not even think about challenging her. That path only leads to destruction. Though Wood had emerged victorious, Najenda reprimanded him with a flick to the forehead. To her, Wood had acted impulsively. Despite her anger, she also looked at Wood with a hint of admiration. Both Wood and were still young, not yet even 15, and Najenda looked at them as she would at her own juniors. The brutal acts of Asdith and the Three Beasts toward the tribal people revealed to Najenda the Empire's dark, corrupt side. But Wood's actions, on the other hand, gave her hope. At least not all of the Empire's people were beyond redemption, some still held fast to their sense of justice and were willing to stand up at the right moment. The hundreds of tribal women and children that Wood had won in the bet with Asdith were ultimately released by him. That was all they could do, the rest were not as fortunate. Asdeath and the three beasts showed no mercy to the other tribal people, carrying on with their cruel executions. Unable to tolerate it any longer, Najunda decided to take action. One night, after killing the guards, she secretly freed the remaining tribal women and children. By the Empire's laws, what Najunda did was no different from treason. This decision was one Najunda had reached only after careful consideration. Asdeath's and her subordinates' brutal massacre of innocent tribal people made her realize that the Empire had truly sunk into corruption and darkness. Resolving to save her country in her own way, Najunda decided to defect and join the only power capable of opposing the Empire. After freeing the tribal people, Najunda planned to flee, riding under the cover of night to the Revolutionary Army's headquarters. However, as she approached the stable, ready to leave, she found two figures already waiting for her in the moonlight. "Boss, if you were planning to free the prisoners, why didn't you take care of the guards properly? No matter how careful you are, so many prisoners escaping is bound to cause a stir. But don't worry, we've taken care of it for you." The two figures waiting were none other than Wood. If it had been earlier, Najunda wouldn't have paid much attention to these two young soldiers. But after what had happened, Najunda now regarded them with a new level of respect. "Lubbock, Wood, why are you here?" Najunda asked, surprised. She hadn't told anyone of her plans, and she had chosen to act in the dead of night. She hadn't expected anyone to catch on. Najunda had hidden her intentions well, even discussing her return plans with her friend Asdeath earlier in the day. She hadn't shown any sign of betraying the Empire. But she had forgotten one thing. Her loyal follower. While others might not have noticed Najunda's strange behavior, Lubbock had observed her closely, which led to the current situation. "You two should go back. You know what I intend to do. With your talents as Imperial Arm users, you'll definitely be put to good use in the Empire." Najunda didn't think Lubbock and Wood had came to stop her. Otherwise, Lubbock wouldn't have mentioned cleaning up her loose ends. If they weren't here to stop her, then they must be here to join her. But Najunda wasn't willing to let that happen. Lubbock and Wood were both still young, barely 15. Joining the Revolutionary Army was tantamount to going against the Empire, a force so large and established that the fledgling rebellion seemed feeble in comparison. In her eyes, they had promising futures in the Empire and didn't need to throw their lives away in a fight they couldn't win. "I've already made up my mind," Lubbock said, pulling a blood-stained wire from the spool on his wrist. "If you're joining the Revolutionary Army, then I'm coming with you. I killed the guards earlier using the marks are obvious. Once this escape is discovered, they'll eventually trace it back to me. I have no way back." Lubbock's Imperial Arm was a wire weapon made from the hair of a legendary dragon-like creature from the Eastern Sea. It was strong, sharp, and capable of various uses like setting traps, creating barriers, and binding or cutting enemies. As Lubbock explained, the unique wounds his weapon left behind would make it easy to identify his involvement. "And what about Wood? Did Lubbock drag you into this? With your strength and Asdeath's favor, becoming a general in the Empire would only be a matter of time." Najunda tried to convince Wood, knowing he had potential in the Empire. Wood, leaning casually against the stable post, cut Najunda off. "I joined because I wanted to. The Empire is much stronger than the Revolutionary Army. If I want to fight strong people, I can't stay with them. I have to go against them. If I want to compete with the strongest, the only way to do that is to become their enemy. That's why joining the Revolutionary Army makes the most sense." Najunda was speechless. She had seen battle maniacs before, but never one as straightforwardly obsessed as Wood. In reality, Wood's decision was partly due to his desire to maintain his persona as a warrior and partly because Lubbock had persuaded him. The two had been friends since childhood. If Lubbock defected to join the Revolutionary Army while Wood stayed behind, they'd eventually face each other in battle. Lubbock didn't want to fight his friend, nor did he want Wood to become one of their most formidable enemies. He eventually managed to convince Wood by pointing out that this was the only way they could keep fighting side by side. Seeing that both Lubbock and Wood were determined to join her, and knowing how valuable Imperial Arm users were, Najunda finally gave in. The three of them rode through the night, leaving the camp far behind. Their original plan was to reach the Revolutionary Army's headquarters in 3 days. However, on the second day, their path was blocked by an unexpected, though not entirely surprising, figure. Dressed in her signature white military uniform, stood in their way. Her long, toned legs were on display, her military saber strapped to her waist, as if she'd been waiting for them. "Najunda, I didn't expect this from you," Asdeath said, her voice calm and cold. "But making this kind of decision must have shaken you, right? You, with your fiery spirit, forgot that we have flying in the military, didn't you? These ordinary horses could never outrun them." Though she was alone, Asdeath's mere presence exerted an enormous pressure on the 3 defectors. Before any of them could react, Asdeath's figure disappeared. In an instant, She was upon Najenda, her saber inches away from her. Wood barely managed to intercept, his blade clashing with Asdeath's saber, sparks flying. Najenda knew she had been too slow. Even if she had reacted in time, she would have lost an arm at best. She had known Asdeath was powerful, but she had no idea the difference between them was so great. Asdeath hadn't even used her imperial arm. She was simply too fast and too strong. Wood was sent flying back, his feet skidding across the ground as he finally managed to stop himself. Feeling the numbing sensation in his hand, he looked at Asdeath, a grin spreading across his face. I was right. You truly are a worthy opponent. In the world of pirates, Wood might not have lost in terms of sheer physical strength. But here, in his 13-year-old body, with Asdeath's exceptional combat skills and her special imperial arm, he knew he was at a disadvantage. Asdeath, however, seemed equally impressed. I was right about you too. You're special. At your age, I wasn't even close to being this strong. My offer still stands. Join me, and I'll forget all of this ever happened. Wood laughed, shaking his head. I'm sorry, but I still have to decline, Asdeath. If I stay in the Empire, I won't get the chance to fight powerful warriors like you as freely as I do now. With that, Wood tightened his grip on his blade and charged at Asdeath once more. Chapter 399, Wood's Imperial Arm. You remind me of my past self. That's right. Only the strong survive. Anyone who lives through pity isn't fit to be called strong. Since you want a fight, I'll grant your wish. I'll prove that I am the one who deserves to survive. The two figures sprinted at each other at high speed, their long blades clashing in midair, generating waves of energy that left deep gashes in the earth below. The speed of their strikes was so intense that Najenda and Lubbock, who wanted to aid Wood, found no opportunity to do so. The battle between the two swordsmen was so fast that only after images of their forms could be seen. Ordinary people would find it impossible to track them with their eyes, and the only indication of the furious fight was the ringing sound of their swords crashing against each other. The glowing slashes from their blades appeared high above the ground one moment and then flashed down to the earth the next. Wood's grasp of swordsmanship, refined across different worlds, was formidable, but Asdeath's sweeping military-style sword techniques were equally impressive. Asdeath was a true prodigy, having hunted large danger beasts along the northern border by herself since she was a child. Even without her imperial arms, her strength alone was enough to crush more than 99% of other imperial arms wielders. In terms of swordsmanship alone, Wood might have had a slight edge over Asdeath, but it wasn't by much. And besides sword skills, in every other aspect, speed, strength, stamina, Asdeath clearly held the advantage. After many clashes, Wood, whose physical prowess was inferior, began to falter. Asdeath delivered a powerful slash that sent Wood flying through the air. Najenda, who had been watching from a distance, saw her opportunity when Wood was knocked away. She immediately squeezed the trigger on her imperial arms, the romantic turret, Pumpkin. Facing an opponent like Asdeath, Najenda felt the enormous pressure, even though Wood was the one actually fighting her. The romantic turret, Pumpkin, grew stronger in times of crisis, and while this wasn't Najenda's strongest shot, it was still more than powerful enough. A massive pink beam burst forth from the weapon, the recoil so powerful that it made the horse beneath Najenda skittish. Seeing the beam hurtling toward her, Asdeath attempted to evade, only to find that her legs had somehow been caught in thin, nearly invisible wires. The wires led back to a green-haired young man who had all of them gripped tightly in his hand, each of the threads drawn taut. During the battle between Wood and Asdeath, Lubbock hadn't found an opportunity to intervene, due to their incredible speed. He was also cautious not to accidentally harm Wood. Nonetheless, he'd secretly used his imperial arms, Crosstail, to set a trap. The moment Wood was knocked into the range of his trap, Lubbock sprung into action. The wires of Crosstail were made from the whiskers of a super dangerous cloud dragon. They could slice through an average person's body effortlessly, and even a danger beast with a strong physique would be cut into pieces once entangled. When Lubbock saw Asdeath entangled in his Crosstail wires, a confident grin spread across his face. No matter how strong she was, Asdeath was still human. And no matter how strong a human body could be, it was still just flesh and blood. But just as Lubbock confidently pulled on the wires, he realized that Asdeath wasn't injured at all. Instead, a harsh grating noise rang out, one that seemed to set his teeth on edge. Through the cold transmitted along the Crosstail wires, Lubbock realized where the sound was coming from. Asdeath's imperial arms. Demon manifestation, Demon's extract. Was forged from the blood of a legendary super dangerous beast that lived in the extreme north. It had once been kept in a jar, and anyone who had drunk even a tiny bit of it had gone insane. Those who had previously drunk from the jar, even in small amounts, had been driven mad by the rejection of the super dangerous beast's blood, as well as the raging thoughts it contained. None had survived the madness. Asdeath not only overcame the power of Demon's Extract but drank every last drop of the blood in the jar. That meant that, unlike the other Imperial Arms users, Asdeath would be the final wielder of the Demon's Extract. And since she drank all of it, she could wield the Imperial Arms power to a far greater extent than any who came before. She was already overwhelmingly powerful on her own, and as the last wielder of the strongest Imperial Arms, Asdeath had become the Empire's undefeated general. Demon Manifestation. Demon's Extract was a terrifying ice-type Imperial Arms, granting Asdeath the ability to control and command ice. The reason Lubbock's cross-tail wires hadn't been able to cut Asdeath was that she had covered her body in a thin layer of ice. Though the wires managed to slice through the icy armor, they didn't even touch her skin, which was why Lubbock felt the chill through his wires. Lubbock's cross-tail had failed to sever Asdeath's limbs, but it did manage to restrict her movement. At that moment, Najanda's romantic turret, Pumpkin, had already fired its shockwave at Asdeath, leaving her no chance to evade. Asdeath was certainly powerful, but even she couldn't come out of a direct hit from romantic turret's blast unscathed. Najanda didn't expect to defeat Asdeath. Her goal was simply to inflict enough damage to slow her down, ensuring that she wouldn't pursue them. Not a bad strategy, but if this is all you've got, it's far from enough to defeat me. Despite her restricted movement and the incoming beam of destructive energy, Asdeath remained calm. With a smile, she seemed almost relaxed as she commented on Najanda and Lubbock's teamwork. She drove her military saber into the ground, and suddenly, a wall of ice several meters high and at least a meter thick erupted in front of her. Boom! The pink beam from romantic turret struck just as the ice wall rose, causing a massive explosion as the energy collided with the ice. The ice shattered into countless shards, which fell like a glittering snowfall. As Najanda and Lubbock craned their necks to see through the thick dust and snow, wondering about Asdeath's condition, Lubbock suddenly felt an immense force pull on his arm. Clearly, Asdeath hadn't died. Not only that, but she had counterattacked immediately. The cross-tail wires were extremely tough, resistant to being severed even by most blades. But now, that very strength had become a deadly weakness. Unable to sever the wires, Lubbock found himself being pulled toward Asdeath by brute force. On the other end of the wires, Asdeath emerged from the cloud of dust, entirely unharmed except for some dirt on her clothes. She gripped her saber in one hand and held the cross-tail wires in the other, her face twisted into a cruel grin as Lubbock hurtled towards her.